There has been this question about whether or not Epstein belongs to intelligence. Well, welcome back to the Epstein Network. Ehud Barak was a military juggernaut. He was the head of Amman, which is the biggest intelligence group in Israel. Went to Jeffrey Epstein's home 43 times. Then you have 17 White House logs of Jeffrey Epstein visiting Bill Clinton's White House. In fact, what was Bill Burns before he became head of the CIA?
Buddy of Jeffrey Epstein.
He was the head of the political affairs section for Russia in the 1990s when we were running the whole Harvard operation. And what happened was, by way of Gary Kasparov and a former child soldier in Sudan who resettled in the U.S. and studied at Harvard's Kennedy School, met with an undercover agent to work with this outside financier to get money for guns so that Sudanese rebels can use them to kill Russians. Harvard gets paid by the government to do this. In fact, this is why I always say universities are not what they seem. Go to Google, pull up a Google image of Jeffrey Epstein, Harvard.
Hey guys, if you're not subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button on the video. And if you don't have time to watch this episode right now, no problem, but I'd really appreciate it if you would save it to your watch later playlist. Finally, if you'd like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below. Thank you. Ben's back again.
Great to see you, man.
Good to see you as well. There's been a lot going on since the last time you were here, literally like 8 weeks ago.
Yeah, world is moving fast.
Yeah, I see a lot of videos coming from you, long live streams as well, breaking down some of these things. It was ironic that we ended the last podcast with you talking about Elon and Trump, and then like 3 days later it was like D-Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll get there on that. But you've been tweeting out a lot of things obviously related to this Epstein stuff, so we'll go through all your findings there as well as some good old-fashioned USAID stuff today. But one of the things you keep pointing out is like everything comes back to Iran-Contra. Everything comes back to Iran-Contra. So we throw around this term we throw it around online all the time, Iran-Contra. A lot of people out there obviously know the basics of what it is. But what I would love to start off with today is a full history of like, here's the documentary, here's what happened with Iran-Contra, and then we'll paint back everything that you're painting back to it.
Yeah. The reason I always come back to Iran-Contra, even for things that happened before, like Tulsi just dropped this 230,000 documents around the Martin Luther King assassination. Yeah. Which was in 1968. Iran-Contra wasn't until 1981 to 1988. But it's the reason I always come back to Iran-Contra and why I think that everybody should really do a study of it is because it's the way to understand how intelligence work got structured after the first set of real reforms to the CIA. And we've been living in the shadow of the structure of Iran-Contra ever since. So you had the CIA get born in 1947 under the National Security Act. And from 1947 until 1975, it had a free ride. It could do pretty much anything. There was no real oversight. There was no Senate Select Committee. There was no Senate Intelligence Committee. There was no House Intelligence Committee. You didn't need to get written sign-off to do a covert action through a presidential finding. It could get away with literal murder. I mean, it could literally go and assassinate people with a heart attack gun. If you go back and go to YouTube and put on the Frank Church holding up the heart attack gun with James Jesus Angleton and Colby, the CIA director. I mean, they could literally get away with murder, and they were also very sloppy during this period. From the 1940s to the 1970s, the traditional way that the CIA would move would be through the creation of what they called CIA Proprietaries, which was when the CIA both funded an organization and then directed or controlled it. And what happened in the mid-1970s, in the run-up to the Jimmy Carter administration, things came to a head because the CIA had been messing around so much with the anti-war side of the Democrat Party, which was becoming more and more ascendant during the Vietnam War, which was basically 55 to 75. As that war is getting more and more scandalized and there's more and more heat on the CIA, things come to a head with these Church and Pike committees in Congress, which turn up all the dirt on the CIA. That's when Operation Mockingbird gets exposed about CIA and the media. That's when Operation Chaos gets exposed about the CIA infiltrating student groups on college campuses. That's when MK gets exposed with CIA and messing around with mind control and behavioral influence. That's when really everybody in society begins looking at their own institutional ties to this cloak and dagger spy agency. The universities, the unions, all the way down to the teachers' unions. The CIA was paying the National Education Association $1 million to tilt their policy and whatnot. These institutions are still around today. But what happened beginning in 75, 76, and then when Carter gets elected in 76, is their handcuffs put on direct CIA activity. And so everything would require a presidential finding for every covert action. So the president had to approve of it, and that also meant that the president was therefore responsible. The whole plausible deniability cloak that the CIA had since 1948 began to get very messy when you had to have written sign-off for all of the activity. And the fact that there was now so much oversight of it made it hard to be plausible, to keep plausible deniability. And so the CIA had to change the way it moved in order to maintain plausible deniability. And it moved into the NGO layer and into the outside financier layer from the 70s into the early 80s. When Jimmy Carter became president, a lot of people think back of Jimmy Carter, especially in the Republican spaces, like the weakest president of the modern times. He completely decimated the CIA's traditional capabilities. He did something called the Halloween Massacre, which fired 30% of the entire operations division of the CIA in a single day, crippled their budget, swore off all different categories of covert action. And it was also during this period that the U.S. lost control of Iran. In 1979, there was the Iranian Revolution. Of course, there was the Iran hostage situation, which sort of gave rise to Ronald Reagan winning in 1980. And so you had these Democrats, and it's funny how this is sort of flipped in the modern era, because you have now much more anti-war voices on the GOP side than on the DNC side. But in the early 1980s, you still had the Democrats in control of Congress, but you had this Republican president, and they wanted to do certain types of foreign policy that the Democrats disagreed with. In particular, there was, getting to Iran-Contra now, in Iran-Contra, you had two different, the Contras refer to Nicaragua, and the Contra rebel faction that was being backed by the Reagan White House to topple the Sandinista government. That was sort of the left wing seen as Marxist. And so you had the 1979 revolution in Iran, which made it illegal to sell arms to Iran because of the arms embargo. And then Democrats in the early 1980s passed something called the Boland Amendment, which prohibited any U.S. government money from going to the Contras in Nicaragua. So
what year was that again? I'm sorry.
This is in the early this is 1981.
Okay.
So the Democrats say you can't fund the Contras in Nicaragua, and also you can't sell weapons to Iran because of the arms embargo. So you had these two different illegal things that were banned by Congress, which is supposed to hold the executive branch to account. But you had a executive branch that wanted to do it anyway, so they had to find a way to get creative. And this starting point, I think, is very useful to understand how the intelligence apparatus moves when it knows it's not supposed to do something, but believes that it can creatively find a way to do it anyway. So what happened in the early 1980s is they said, okay, we can't get USAID money to fund the Nicaraguan Contras. We can't get Pentagon money. We can't get State Department money. We can't get CIA money. How do we still make sure that the Contras have a chance at overthrowing the Sandinista government? And what they worked out was a scheme. In 1980, the Iraq-Iran war broke out, 1980 to 1988. And this was when Saddam Hussein's Iraq wanted to, saw the weakness of this new Iranian government that had just taken power in 1979. The Iraqis outnumbered the Iranians by 2-1 in terms of their military, and thought that they could just sweep into Iran and take over huge portions of it. So Iraq launches this attack on Iran, and you would think, given that the U.S., Israel, UK all wanted the Iranian government toppled, that would be something that we would be supportive of. But there were tensions because we didn't want Iraq to have regional hegemony there. We had a very schizophrenic foreign policy during the Iran-Iraq war because I think it was Kissinger who quipped, I only wish there was a way that both sides could lose. And so even though we wanted the Iranian regime toppled and weakened, we didn't want Iraq to move in and take it over. And we were looking for ways to get inroads with the Iranian government in order to work out some way to allow private industry, exploitation of the oil and gas. Of course, we had installed the Iranian government in 1953.
Yes.
After there was an attempt to nationalize the Anglo-British Petroleum and U.S., U.K. Oil interests. 1979, though, our guy gets evicted. Iran looks like it's going to be taken over by Iraq. And so in order to basically do a favor for the government of Iran with the expectation that they would be doing favors back, we organized an illegal arms sale to them through Adnan Khashoggi, who was the biggest weapons dealer in world history. And for perspective on that, Adnan Khashoggi made 3 times more in a single year as a commissions agent for Lockheed Martin than every other weapons dealer commissioned by Lockheed Martin combined. 3 times more than everybody else combined. This guy,
he was distantly connected to the royal family in Saudi Arabia.
He moved in the same networks as Epstein did, and Epstein would brag in 1987 that he was one of his key clients. Trump would actually later buy Khashoggi's yacht, I think in 1989 for something like $70 million.
Not sketchy at all.
Well, it was a crazy network in the early 80s, and it's amazing to look back on now because of everything that's happening with Iran, U.S., Israel, U.K., Iran. This same proxy war that we've been fighting there since the 1950s is very much a key focus of U.S. foreign policy today. And so as it's interesting that the Epstein affair is popping off at the same time as this tension is being renewed, because it's a good opportunity to excavate the tombs of both of those. But what happened is the plot in Iran-Contra was to use outside brokers to sell the weapons to Iran from Saudi Arabia and Israel, and then skim the proceeds of the weapons sales to fund the Contras. Mm-hmm. So it would still be compliant with the Boland Amendment, the prohibition from Congress on direct funds coming. So it'd basically be doing one illegal operation off the books covertly to fund another operation off the books covertly. So it was a little bit too clever by half. What ended up happening was Adnan Khashoggi in 1983 flies to Washington, D.C. to meet with the National Security Advisor, Robert McFarland.
Have you ever read 2 articles about the same event and felt like they were from completely different planets? With today's fragmented media landscape, it's getting harder to know what's real, what's biased, and what's just noise. I started using Ground News because I wanted more transparency in my news consumption. They don't eliminate bias, they help you see it. Ground News brings together reporting from across the political spectrum so you can actually compare headlines and coverage. It's an antidote to information overload, sensationalism, and algorithm-driven echo chambers. You get to see how many sources are covering a story, how differently it's being framed, and which side of the spectrum may be ignoring it altogether. Their built-in blind spot feature also shows you stories one side of the aisle isn't seeing. You'll see bias rating, factuality scores, and even ownership information, i.e. who funds the outlets reporting the story. Go to ground.news/Julian for a better way to stay informed. And when you subscribe today, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan by using this QR code or my link, ground.news/Julian, link in description below. Now go enjoy some balanced coverage.
That's the head, the National Security Advisor is the head of the National Security Council. That is the sort of apex predator of the military, intelligence, and diplomatic state. That is sort of the highest level in the cabinet. The National Security Advisor meets with the president every day. The Secretary of State may only meet once a week with the president. It's a little weird right now because Secretary Rubio is both Secretary of State and the interim head of the National Security Council. But the National Security Advisor is the head of the National Security Council, which controls the interagency. So everything that's done at state, everything that's done at CIA, everything that's done at DOD has to be run through and approved by the National Security Council. So Khashoggi flies in 83 to Washington, to the White House, to meet with the head of the National Security Council to pitch this scheme that if the U.S. supplied arms to Israel by way of Adnan Khashoggi, the Israeli side would handle the weapon sales to Iran, and then would funnel skim to the Contras in Nicaragua to fund the Nicaraguan side of Iran-Contra.
Yep.
So you have like very different. I think last time I was here, we pointed to the world map. And we pointed out how far Pakistan was from Cuba, and it's about equidistant the distance of Iran to Nicaragua. Now this whole thing moved through offshore bank accounts, and because not only do you need to have discrete offshore, foreign financiers who are arranging for the money and the illegal weapons sales to do another thing that's illegal under Congress, but now you need to make the money illegal. You need to launder the money so that the proceeds can't be tracked back because it's illegal under the arms embargo to sell those weapons. And so what the U.S. did is we created CI proprietary banks in the Bahamas, the Virgin Islands. We took money from those sales and then we pushed it into the offshore banking network, Switzerland, Panama, and also set up a whole logistics chain to support the Contras. And this is where it gets back to the sort of drug story. Because what you're doing here is you're running guns and drugs from the Nicaraguan Contra side. You have the weapons side in Iran. And then on the Latin American side, how do you get the Contras to defeat the Sandinistas? Well, they need guns, lots of them, Matrix style. The U.S. was basically tank or the Morpheus figure sort of giving the guns. But the other way was the sale of drugs, which is yet another illegal thing that has to be done covertly. Now the CIA it started with the Department of War before it was called the Department of Defense. In the 1940s, the Department of War was running drugs through the Golden Triangle that the Kuomintang sat on. This is the Chiang Kai-shek Chinese nationalists against the Chinese communists. We were taking the opium fields that basically the Kuomintang sat on, and we were running them to convert to cash to buy guns. So you basically have this pipeline of drugs to cash to guns. That's how we get guns.
That's the most American thing I've ever heard in my life.
It is. So what started as a British thing, the modern posture contra China started with the Opium Wars in the 1800s. The reason that Hong Kong was a British territory was because it was seized by the British because the Chinese did not want to buy the drugs that British India was growing, and the drugs were a giant commercial trade profit for the British Empire. China was a huge market. When China started having all these opium den issues, they announced a blanket ban on the purchase of British opium, and that's when the Brits invaded, bombed the whole South China Seafront, seized Hong Kong, and then flash forward to the 1940s, and you had these. How do you fund a war when you don't have USAID money? This is something that I think is so topical now, as USAID was just shuttered July 1st, and now the State Department's inheriting its portfolio.
So wait, you're not the spokesman anymore? You lost your salary? I didn't know this was going to be false advertising.
Well, USAID may be dead, but what's that? The king is dead. Long live the king. USAID may be dead, but the USAID function will have a permanent life in American foreign policy. It is being moved into the State Department and into other. Its function is being pushed into other places like the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, and that also plays into the Iran-Contra affair. So just putting the button on this, we had a long history in Southeast Asia of doing drugs for cash for guns, but when it came to the continental United States, this was a big no-no, because then you end up having the retail product coming back to American streets, and this is what popped off in the 1980s. the National Security Council and Central Intelligence Agency and U.S. military were running a supply network to the Contras. Again, all because they couldn't get USAID money to do it, or State Department or DoD grants. They had to use other sources of funds like black market commerce from the drugs. So they would take the coca leaves that had been cultivated by the U.S. military as a way to fund the anti-Marxist right-wing death squads that were all over Latin America during the Cold War. And they flew them to places like Mena, Arkansas, which was in the 1980s under Bill Clinton's control. Bill Clinton,
Barry Seals action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Mena, Arkansas was this little Air Force base, and well, it was a little town, population about 1,000 people. And it was used as a CIA base to run drugs into. They also used ports in Miami for this as well. And they would fly the drugs in, they'd wash the cash, and then they'd send guns back over the border to the Nicaraguan Contras. And one of the main transports for this was a CIA proprietary airline called Southern Air Transport. Southern Air Transport was formerly Air America. These are both CIA proprietary airlines. The CIA doesn't really do this anymore.
We sure about that?
Well, they do it through USAID. They do it through the Development Finance Corporation. They do it through outside financiers. But you can actually go back and look, even in the JFK files, there's great documentation that's been declassified about this change in structure. Because it's very difficult to run this as a covert operation without getting busted. At its height, Air America had about 20,000 employees. This is, yes, because it had all these spindle airlines. It had Continental Air Services, it had Southern Air Transport.
And it's all a CIA.
Right. Well, you can see why they got busted so many times on this. When the CIA funds something directly, this is how you have USAID having 3 times the budget of the CIA now. We needed to bifurcate this function of funding and directing. If they're funded by the U.S. government, they're an asset. He who pays the piper calls the tune. It doesn't really matter if the funding is coming from the CIA, if it's coming from someone in the U.S. government who's in on it and understands the purpose of these funds, and the subject group who's being instrumentalized knows that they need to do what's asked of them if they want to keep the money flowing. But at the time, because remember, this is all before these big sets of reforms happened in the early 1980s. You had Air America around for 30 years at that time. And so Southern Air Transport was moving the whole supply chain around the drugs, cash, and guns. Now, Southern Air Transport would come back later into the story. One of the places that it touched down frequently was the U.S. Virgin Islands in St. Thomas, which is 2 miles away from Little St. James.
Yeah, dangerously close.
Right. And remember, you have Jeffrey Epstein saying in 1987, at the height of Iran-Contra, that Adnan Khashoggi was a client of his. You have Jeffrey Epstein later purchasing the island right next door to that you actually fly into St. Thomas if you want to get to Little St. James, the exact place where Southern Air Transport was. And then in 1994, so Southern Air Transport gets in a lot of trouble during the Iran-Contra scandals. John Kerry, who would later become Secretary of State and run for president against George W. Bush.
The Skull and Bones election.
Yes, the Skull and Bones election, where both sides of the aisle were Yale boys.
They can't talk about it, though.
Mm-hmm. It's a great clip. So John Kerry actually leads the investigation, and if you look this up if you want, it's called the Kerry Report, into the drug running allegations about the Central Intelligence Agency during Iran-Contra.
What year is this?
This is in the mid-1980s into the mid-1990s.
But that's when he's running the investigation?
Because he's a senator at the time. He's Senator John Kerry.
Interesting. Put a pin in that, but keep going.
And you know who else was all over this story? Maxine Waters.
In fact, Auntie Maxine was on it? Come on.
Oh, she was leading the charge.
I love her.
If you go to YouTube and you look up John Deutsch, CIA, Los Angeles, and you can watch what would end up happening. And just while I was looking that up, I'm going to just set the stage a little bit here. So people are familiar a little bit maybe with the story of Gary Webb, who is this independent journalist who's working for the San Jose Mercury News.
Did you see what the T-shirt Tommy G was wearing in Milwaukee when we got abducted?
No, what was it?
It was a giant shirt that said "Gary Webb never forget."
Yep. Well, you can't forget now because this is very much a USAID story and a question for how we're going to deal with this for foreign policy. So, okay, so look up his Los Angeles. I think it was in Compton. Look up cocaine, Los Angeles. Oh no, you can
keep John Deutsch in there.
Okay. Yeah. So just before we play this, I'm going. Yeah. Okay. So
the second one,
but there's a whole. I think there's a whole hour as well. If you, it was in a gymnasium there, and I believe Maxine. Wait, scroll down a little bit more. If not, we can just stick with.
Should we add full testimony on the end of that, or is that the 129 right there?
Is that that's him taking questions for an hour and a half. We can go with the second one there.
Okay.
If you just load that up, and then let me just set the stage.
Yeah, you set the
bit
stage.
Here. So a couple things to keep in mind here. Southern Air Transport was the CI proprietary used for this operation in Iran-Contra. Southern Air Transport is based in Miami because Miami is the big port that to the whole Caribbean and to Latin America. Southern Air Transport moves in 1994 to Columbus, Ohio to service the Limited. The Limited at the time was the largest retail chain in the United States.
Wexner,
yes. Yeah. Owned by Les Wexner, the financial sponsor for Jeffrey Epstein. And Jeffrey Epstein in 1991 was given durable power of attorney over all of the Limited, as well as the Wexner Foundation. So the Ohio Development County office worked out this deal to give tax incentives to the CI proprietary airline to pack up and move from Miami, to move to Rickenbacker Air Force Base, literally to move to a military Air Force base to service Jeffrey Epstein's company, basically, because he had durable power of attorney, meaning he was the authorized signatory on the paperwork. So you have a CI proprietary airline that's moving guns and drugs and cash for Iran-Contra. In 1994, it packs up to service Jeffrey Epstein and his sponsor, Les Wexner, so that they can move goods back and forth from Hong Kong, is how they described it. Interestingly, the Limited also bought a big gun range, gun company, sporting goods and hunting equipment thing in 1994, right as Southern Air Transport is moving to Columbus, Ohio. The Limited buys up a bunch of gun stores. I mean, this is the same thing that happened in Fast and Furious when, when the FBI and ATF were, basically working out secret agreements with gun stores in Arizona. That had interagency approval. It had CIA, State Department, National Security Council approval for Fast and Furious. That's what cost Obama Eric Holder as Attorney General. But I think it's very curious that you have this same network that's involved in Iran-Contra. And by the way, Jeffrey Epstein had a fake passport. It was found in his safe in January 2019 when the FBI raided Epstein's home. They found a fake... July, yeah, right. I guess July, because that's when he was arrested. They drilled a hole into his safe, and they found a fake passport that was issued in 1982, expired in 1987. So that's right during Iran-Contra.
Very interesting.
And it listed the residence as Saudi Arabia, right where Adnan Khashoggi was. And it had Epstein's photo, but a fake name, and it had 4 stamps on the passport showing that he went in and out of Saudi Arabia, went in and out of, I think it was the UK and a couple other countries, 4 times. I mean, this fake passport was so good in the 1980s that he was able to travel pretty much freely under a fake name internationally while Iran-Contra was happening. But Southern Air Transport moves in 94 to service the company Jeffrey Epstein had complete control over with durable power of attorney. That means you can broker deals, you can take out loans, you can run the business. And then Southern Air Transport folds up in, I think, October 1998 in Columbus, the very day that the CIA confessed to using Southern Air Transport to run the guns and drugs during Iran-Contra. Because a lot of this stuff broke open in the 1980s, but it wasn't until the late 1990s. I think Dark Alliance was published in 97 from Gary Webb.
That sounds right.
And this John Deutsch I think this was in the late 1990s, that the CIA director was doing a mea culpa. He was traveling around to black neighborhoods.
Sorry.
Yeah, basically saying, listen, it was an isolated thing. It wasn't systematic. There may have been a little bit of leakage, but we won't do that again. And so this scene is John Deutsch, the then CIA director, at a gymnasium. I think it was in Compton or Inglewood. It was, and Maxine Waters was leading the charge, and you can look that up separately after. She was the one who was accusing the CIA of doing this for racial animosity reasons. And he was basically saying, no, it wasn't because we hated black people. It's because we wanted to fund a proxy war. No. Listen, we still love you. It was a different dark ops thing. But
well, luckily he didn't give a speech about crack like Hunter Biden did. That would have made everyone.
It'd be a little bit more honest. I would like to see Hunter Biden as, if we made Bobby Kennedy the head of HHS, and we made Kash Patel the head of FBI. Listen, if John Ratcliffe is amenable to it, I wouldn't mind seeing a Hunter Biden, deputy CIA director, because, it's sort of like Catch Me If You Can, right?
Deputy CIA director, because he knows ball,
and he knows where the the little balls of what is it, cottage cheese? They say are on the floor.
Sodium bicarbonate. You take out all the liquid, and then it's your fork.
It's like listening to fucking Michael Jordan talk about basketball. I really did want to do crack by the end of that. I'm not gonna lie.
Find you a woman who loves you as much as
Hunter
Biden
did
loves
you
crack
see
cocaine.
like his eyes glaze over where he's just off into the distance, like the end of a movie where he's just thinking about it, and then he was like, yeah, I'm gonna get too euphoric if I just keep talking about this.
He had a whole lexicon for being able to control his own memory.
All right, let's play this. Got it?
I'll tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
This guy Deutsch is kind of a schmeed, too.
All right, obviously that is an answer for a lot of you. Now can you please?
I refer...
All right, now can you please?
I refer direct...
Wait a minute.
He's fake writing things down right now. He's sweating.
Got the earpiece in. What do I say?
Wait a minute here.
I like this MC.
If you don't like what's going on here, please leave now.
Juanita McDonald.
No, leave. No, leave now, because there are others who do want to hear
She's got
what's
her
going on
Trump
in this
hand
room.
motions down.
No, she's got it. She's ahead of her time.
Will you please take your seats? I will come back to you as we roll back across to the center section.
It's like a carbon copy, actually.
Director Deutsch, I will refer you to three specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country. I have been trying to get this out for 18 years, and I have the evidence. My question for you is very specific, sir. If in the course of the IG's investigations and Fred Hitz's work, you come across evidence of severely criminal activity,
Let him speak
and it's classified, will you use that classification to hide the criminal activity, or will you tell the American people the truth?
All right, you want to hear the response first from Congressman Julian Dixon and then from the director.
Like, fuck that. We want the director.
Tough crowd,
Wait a minute.
man.
From your, I'm sorry, sir. I will allow the director to speak first and then Congressman Julian Dixon.
If you have
All right, this is
information
Deutsch.
about CIA illegal activity in drugs, you should immediately bring that information to wherever you want, but let me suggest three places. The Los Angeles Police Department.
Oh my God.
He's working for the Los Angeles Police Department.
Oh my God.
The FBI.
Please.
If
What a crazy start to that answer.
It is your choice, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Inspector General, or office of one of your Congress persons from this.
Who's sitting right there?
18 years ago, sir, and I got shot at for it.
Can you imagine the head of the CIA subjecting himself to this now?
No.
Wait a minute, sir. And sir, you have not gotten the mic yet. You are not. But wait a minute, then don't speak out of turn.
Let me say something else.
I love this lady.
If this information turns up wrongdoing, we will bring the people to justice and make them accountable.
I'll bet you will.
All right, Congressman Dixon.
Should we pause it right there?
Yeah, you can pause it there.
Yeah,
This
remember
is on-
the headline that came out later? It said, the CIA investigated itself for selling crack
Yes,
in Los
finds no
Angeles
link.
and found no
Yes.
wrongdoing.
Right. But in 1998, they admit, I think it was this 97 or what was the date of this? But the whole thing is fantastic. 1996.
96.
Yeah, so 98, they admitted, kind of a limited hangout version of it. That yes, it was done, but it shouldn't have been done. It was limited. It was, it was not supposed to get on the streets of the U.S. And that was when Southern Air Transport in Columbus, Ohio, declared bankruptcy and shut down operations. So it was actually the same day. You can look up a great article.
In 98.
Yes, and in fact, if you look at Maxine Waters and CIA 1990s cocaine, she was the hardest charging person on this at the time. And it's funny how the direction of a lot of these go. These people who run these investigations from the House and Senate side, and then they kind of drop it and get magically promoted, because Maxine Waters would end up the head of the banking subcommittee in Congress. Here you go. The 1998 CIA drug trafficking allegations hearing with Maxine Waters and Gary Webb. This is in Congress. This is a year after Gary Webb.
Oh, this is with Gary.
Yes. So she was.
It's been my intention to call members in order of seniority, but I have been advised that the senior member of the two that we expected to hear from has deferred to.
Oh, he was a
Juanita
CIA
Melinda
director, too.
McDonald to come forward
Yeah,
first.
that's why.
Since you have been out front in trying to help us on this matter and come to grips with it, and that indeed have had hearings in your district and have had direct involvement, and we welcome you today. We welcome your commentary on the report and any observations you may have for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Before I begin my testimony, please allow me a moment to express my appreciation to you, Chairman Goss, and you,
Anyway,
Ranking
you can
Member
see
Dix,
this is like 2.5 hours,
your
so we need to watch
efforts
this whole
and those
thing.
of your
But what I'm trying to get at, and you can even see like LA Times reporting on this and whatnot. But this was a very big deal in the 1980s and 1990s. It was a huge political hot potato, and a lot of these functions moved over to USAID rather than having the CIA proprietaries doing it.
Sticking under the shell company.
Right. So we talked last time about USAID's strange role in drug running in Afghanistan, where they were irrigating the poppy crops, in order to grow the heroin there. We looked at the suite of Ronald Reagan created NGOs that were involved in that as well. So, for example, when Reagan couldn't get the CIA's old powers back in the early 1980s because Democrats controlled Congress and still hated the CIA, he created a web of government-funded NGOs to do what the CIA used to do. So chief among them, the National Endowment for Democracy, which was conceived of by William Casey, the CIA director.
I was just going to ask, how much of this is Reagan doing it versus like Bill Casey being like, Ronnie, I got this, pal.
Exactly. That's what it was. And William Casey's top guy, Raymond Green, who had done propaganda work for the CIA for about 30 years, midwifed that whole process. The National Endowment for Democracy was set up explicitly. The head of the National Endowment for Democracy, Carl Gershman, publicly told the New York Times, I think in 1986, that the CIA used to get in trouble when democratic groups that were seen as subsidized by the CIA used to get in trouble when those revelations were made public. That's why the endowment was created, the National Endowment for Democracy, to fund them so that it didn't look like they were being funded by the CIA, but that's exactly what it was. It's the same thing with the U.S. Institute of Peace, which was also, I think, in 1984 when that was created. The U.S. Institute of Peace, which had a showdown with the Trump administration. It tries to say it's not a government agency, but it's 100% funded by the government. It's accountable to the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It works in conflict zones, doing the kind of work that the CIA wants to do but doesn't want to put its fingers on. It has a mandatory 15-person board. The Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the head of the National Defense University are 3 mandatory spots on his board. So it has to be directed by the Pentagon, the State Department.
You say mandatory spots?
Yes. Now, this ended up being funny because the U.S. Institute of Peace barricaded its doors. Weapons caches were actually found inside the building when the Trump admin tried to take it over. They refused to allow the Trump-appointed board members to enter the building. They deleted reams of documents. Elon Musk said his Doge people found them trying to delete a terabyte worth of financial data, including money to the Taliban, while the U.S. Institute of Peace was openly telling the Taliban to keep the drugs flowing in Afghanistan because it would have devastating economic consequences to the region if the Taliban post-2022 shut off the drugs.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
So you have them funding
to Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Just Afghanistan or other places?
Go to at Mike Ben Cyber and then just type in U.S. Institute Peace, and you can type in drugs next to that if you want.
Yeah, if you're not following Mike on X, we're gonna have that link down below, and on YouTube you can follow him in both places. But you tweet up a storm on X.
Yeah, but you'll see. Just so you guys can see the receipts on screen, because if you scroll down, this is a video. That's like a 2-hour video. But if you scroll down, yeah, that one right there. So if you pull that first one,
is this
or actually go to the one the tweet right below. You can just see this is what it looked like on the U.S. Institute of Peace website. Again, this is 100% funded by the U.S. government. This is the building right next to the Department of State, right there on 17th Street. And what you'll see, this was on their website in June 2023. The Taliban's successful opium ban is bad for Afghans in the world.
That's not AI.
No, that's a live website link. Yes, saying that it will have negative economic consequences. Now remember, the Taliban tried to ban opium in 2000 because we were growing. The CIA was using the opium to support the Mujahideen the same way we were using the cocaine to support the Contras, the same way we were using the opium to support the Kuomintang. This is standard war funding for the U.S. military and has been for 100 years. And so literally, I mean, the main bank in Iran-Contra was called BCCI, Bank of Credit and Commerce International. Went down in flames. It was a CIA bank. CIA used it for all of the drug money and gun running that was done for the Mujahideen when the CIA created, effectively, the Mujahideen and funded them to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. They would then become ISIS and Al-Qaeda, where we would continue to back them until now you have ISIS, Al-Qaeda as the government of Syria.
Yeah.
But at the time, we were still pumping up the Syrian rebel forces.
This is a nicer version, though. The current ISIS Al-Qaeda is a very nicer, gentler version.
Right. But so you'll see that the Taliban had the same problem China had in the 1800s, where after the Taliban took control of Afghanistan in 2000, in fact, if you pull this up in another tab, if you just look at just Google Taliban shutdown of poppy and heroin in the year 2000.
Mike, is this what Sean Ryan and his source, the guy Legend, is this some of what they were talking about like a year and a half ago?
I believe it's related. I believe this is part of the reason that we fund the Taliban, in order to bribe them to keep these sorts of things going, because this is how we support all of our proxy forces in Central Asia.
Got it.
Oh, here you go. Look at that.
Also from the United States Institute of Peace.
Look at this. What the Taliban poppy ban. But go back in time. Look at the evolution of this. Go to the year 2000. Just go to like Google.com and you'll just see, because we'll come back to this so you can see the history. Oh, here you go. Repeating the similarly successful 2000-2001 prohibition. But if you look at what happened, the Taliban shut down the poppy in 2000.
That's crazy.
2001, 9/11 happens. Where do we first go? We don't first start with Iraq. We start with Afghanistan right after the poppy ban. In 2001, late 2001, we invade Afghanistan, and it goes from being 0%, because about, 70% of the world's heroin supply was being sourced from the Golden Crescent in Afghanistan. Taliban shut it down. We invade the very next year, and under U.S. military occupation, we end up turning Afghanistan into 90% of the world's heroin supply. I think it's something like 95% of Europe's heroin supply. And that was all under U.S. military occupation, stopping them from shutting down the drugs. But yeah, I guess...
this is 4 months before 9/11. Taliban's ban on poppy a success, U.S. aides say. The first American narcotics experts to go to Afghanistan under Taliban rule have concluded that the movement's ban on opium poppy cultivation appears to have wiped out the world's largest crop in less than a year, officials said today. The American findings confirm earlier reports from the United Nations Drug Control Program that Afghanistan, which supplied about 3/4 of the world's opium and most of the heroin reaching Europe, had ended poppy planting in one season. But the eradication of poppies has come at a terrible cost to farming families, and experts say it will not be known until the fall planting season begins whether the Taliban can continue to enforce it. And then the fall hits. And
then the fall hits, we invade, and it goes from 0% to 90% of the world's heroin.
That's right.
All under U.S. military occupation. And where is that money going? That's going to fund our proxy forces in the region. This would go on to fund, the Syrian rebel groups. If you look at, you'll see, all sorts of NGO commentary about how ISIS and Al-Qaeda are part of these huge international drug smuggling operations, and oh my gosh, they're smuggling the drugs under Taliban. No, they were our proxy group.
Yeah,
we commanded the Taliban to keep those drugs flowing so that they could be instrumentalized to topple Bashar al-Assad. And anyway, so you saw that same thing happening in the Western Hemisphere during the 1980s. I believe it's still a very significant part of U.S. geopolitics in Latin America today. But you had to run this through these international networks where you could maintain plausible deniability. And so Trump was the first person to declare these narco networks a terrorist group. And if you look at the New York Times ran the same type of headlines that the U.S. Institute of Peace is. If you go back and you look at, what was it, February or something of 2025, and the New York Times was arguing that there will have negative economic consequences for Trump's ban, designation of narco groups as being a terrorist group, or as being a terrorist class. And what I'm getting at here, though, is this Iran-Contra story is a way to understand pretty much we've not yet evolved past the Iran-Contra stage of evolution. We had phases of intelligence work. 1940s to 1970s, you'd have CI proprietaries. You would have basically no oversight. You wouldn't need any sort of your written sign-off for it. Then you have the reforms from the 1980s.
Church Committee.
Yes. Church Committee, Carter reforms. And then you began so NGOs, outside financiers, offshore banks became the state of play. And now we are in a period of a kind of third reform. And there are very dramatic reforms happening to the intelligence community as we speak. USAID, which took the baton for funding this in the 1980s, has now been gutted. 14,000 people have been laid off. The agency has been shut down. Only 230 people have been kept from USAID, and they've been moved into the State Department. This is fundamentally a State Department role. If you go back and you look at the initial structuring, contemplation debates that were happening in 1948, the CIA didn't need to be its own agency. It was a State Department role. George Kennan, who gave the CIA its cloak of plausible deniability under NSC 10-2, he initially thought you might be able to not have the CIA do this separately. It could just be a State Department Bureau of Organized Warfare is what he was referring to it as. He said the problem is, though, because of the public transparency of the State Department's budget, it might be infeasible to keep it at the State Department because we could not conceal these funds in the State Department's budget. This is how you ended up with this, CIA, being the place that the operations wing of it was. Because at the time, in April 1948, the CIA was mostly conceived of as being for intelligence collection and spycraft rather than operations and
covert warfare, effectively.
Exactly. But USAID is the same thing. USAID does not need to be a separate function unless you want to hide something. Why the State Department is matching grants for most of what USAID does. If you look at a USAID funded entity, probably at least 30-40% of the time you will see a matching grant from the State Department for a smaller amount, but where the State Department Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor will give a grant to something that's also USAID funded. But a lot of times USAID will fund completely on its own. And this is because the independence of USAID allows it to hide. It doesn't have to, it's not part of the National Security Council. So it doesn't need to be cleared by the White House. It maintains fierce independence. The only way to get something out of USAID is through the Inspector General's office there, who basically jumps on the grenade every time. This is why the Senate complains that Senate oversight can't get, we went over last time, can't even get a broad summary description of what many of the operations that's doing, because people will die if even Senate oversight is briefed on what the program actually is. So we're running into this now, which is like, how do you deal with the problem of a perceived need to do covert action? And what structure could this proceed in where it does not allow you to run it as rogue as something like Iran-Contra was? Because the agencies and the networks that were involved are still very much around today. And I get back to this. This is one of the reasons I think you can't touch Jeffrey Epstein, or you can't touch. You can't get to the heart of the issue.
Stay, by the way, with the mic, just don't talk over it if you don't mind. Just right there, perfect.
The heart of the issue, as I see it, is Epstein's links to intelligence. And I know that there's a lot of debate over Epstein's ties to Trump and Trump world, and they are extensive because Trump came up through this Iran-Contra network. I mean, look at things like the casinos and the hotels and the real estate deals around Trump and Trump's ties to figures like Roy Cohn and the like.
That goes back to the 70s.
Yeah, it does. But these were all networks that became activated for foreign policy vis-a-vis Iran in 1979 and became big money networks. And there has been this question about whether or not Epstein belongs to intelligence, especially since July 2019 when Epstein was arrested the second time. And then you had Trump's Secretary of Labor, who was the guy who cut the deal for Epstein in 2008, reportedly saying to the Trump transition team that the reason he cut the sweetheart deal was because Epstein belonged to intelligence and back off and leave it alone. And we've never gotten an answer about whether or not that is true or false. Epstein is arrested for the second time on July 6, 2019. July 9th, 2019, Vicky Ward puts out that article saying that in the Daily Beast that Acosta told the Trump transition officials that Epstein belonged to intelligence, and that's the reason he cut the sweetheart deal. The next day, July 10th, there's 2019. This is the last public statement we've gotten from Alex Acosta on this. He gave a public press conference. It's on YouTube. Everyone can watch it.
Was that the one on the White House lawn when he resigned?
No, this was indoors at a podium while he was still fighting the scandal. He tried to basically answer reporters' questions. It was the last question. It's about an hour and a half YouTube video, I think around like the 55-minute mark. Alex Acosta is asked point blank, I think by a Reuters reporter, did you really say that Epstein was, belonged to intelligence, as Vicky Ward reported just yesterday? And Alex Acosta kind of shuffles, smirks a little bit, and then says, I can't answer that question because of Justice Department ethics rules. All I can say is, don't believe everything that you read in the media. I know it's tempting to go down rabbit holes, but I can neither confirm nor deny. Now, earlier in that same press conference, Acosta would stipulate that something had Justice Department ethics rules about him not opining on, and he'd say, but I'm going to try to answer the question anyway. And in this case, he didn't. And then, there's a little bit of a long and winding road here where in November 2020, the Justice Department's internal investigation claimed to sort of put this to bed in a 348-page report that took them 21 months of investigation to work out. And all they have is a single footnote. It's footnote 244 on page 169, where they said, we asked Acosta if he acknowledged Epstein was an intelligence asset, and Acosta replied, quote, the answer is no. But there's a lot of hair on that. Usually when you ask someone, like if you ask me, do you like sugar in your coffee? I'll be like, no. I won't start with the answer is no. Usually I'll be worked up to that through some other chain of questioning.
That's right.
They don't attach the transcript. First of all, I don't think that Epstein was an asset in the 201 file sense of it. That is, I don't think he would have been recruited as a human intelligence asset who answered to a case officer. And
why not?
Because if you look at the function that it looked like Epstein had from the 1980s into the mid-2000s.
You think he was just a financier?
I think he was a contact, what they call a cooperative contact or liaison or facilitator or friend of the station. If you look at the role that CIA outside financiers have, they're almost never assets. They almost never have 201 files. They're almost never recruited. They are relationships of convenience where they will do business together when it profits both sides. But they largely have an independent life from each other. Like I don't think Epstein was full-time or did everything that was asked of him. And a great example of this is another scandal that played out during Iran-Contra, which was the so-called Iraq Gate, the Iraq pipeline affair. This was another case that involved the same set of countries, or at least very similar sets of countries, and the case of Bruce Rappaport. In the late 1980s, and if you want, you can pull up an article called Intrigue in High Places. I think it was New York Times, January 31st, 1988, I think is when this was published. And you can also go to YouTube and you can play a couple minutes of an NBC clip that covers the broad strokes of this well. But essentially what happened was the U.S. National Security Council, here you go, yeah, Intrigue in High Places. And in fact, if you want to play the NBC clip, just so you guys can get a quick overview of this, if you go to YouTube and you type in Iraq oil pipeline, Ed Meese, 1988, you'll see this. And what I want to draw a line to is Jeffrey Epstein and other financiers who had their own life, but frequently worked with CIA or National Security Council, as well as foreign governments like the Israelis, the Brits, the French, the Saudis.
Is this what you want right here?
There's an NBC one. If you type in NBC, yeah, and Meese is M-E-E. Yeah, 1988
NBC.
1988. Yeah, that second one. Yeah, there you go. So what you'll see here is
that one.
The same sort of networks. Now this is 5 minutes, but if you skip about halfway through, it gets to the guts of it.
Right there.
Yeah,
you want to try it there?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's play it.
Have to wait and see how that work progresses.
But sources confirm a New York Times story today that McKay has told senior White House officials that Meese had a, quote, important and sustained role in pushing the billion-dollar pipeline project. What's at issue is a federal law which makes the Attorney General responsible for prosecuting American citizens who try to bribe foreign officials. House Majority Leader Foley was asked if Meese should step aside during the investigation.
I don't think so. Whether the Attorney General continues in office is a matter for him and for the President to decide.
Aides say the President is strongly supporting his old friend and is adamant that
know where
Meese
he
should
was
not
at this
resign.
I see no reason on earth for the President to take any action unless and until...
They'll give a description in a couple seconds here, I think.
Mr. Meese has done something wrong.
Officials here say they have no indication at this time that McKay intends to indict Meese, but they admit that the special prosecutor has not ruled that out. Robin Lloyd, NBC News at the White House.
That video has 62 views, by the way.
In this latest controversy, Meese finds himself caught up in an international web of big oil, big influence, and big money. In 1983, as the Persian Gulf War grew hotter, Iraq looked for a safer way to get its oil out of the Gulf. A plan was devised for $1 billion pipeline that would stretch from Iraqi oil fields through Jordan onto the Red Sea, passing within miles of the Israeli border. The pipeline was to be built by the U.S. firm Bechtel. But before Bechtel or anyone would put money into the project, they wanted assurances from then Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres that Israel would not attack the pipeline. Bechtel hired Bruce Rappaport, a Swiss businessman with strong ties to Peres. Rappaport, in turn, hired San Francisco lawyer E. Robert Wallach, a close friend of Attorney General Meese. And that's where the Meese connection and his troubles begin. It is a 1985 memo from Wallach to Meese that reportedly talks about payoffs to Israelis for protection of the pipeline. But in a Jerusalem newspaper today, Peres denied he was offered a bribe.
Right.
And in a telephone interview from Switzerland, Bruce Rappaport also denied any bribery attempt.
All I can tell you is that I have never, nor would I even dream, I don't think that anybody could dare to propose to Shimon or anybody else like that money in Israel.
Meanwhile, Special Prosecutor James McKay is also investigating any possible connection between Rappaport and late CIA Director William Casey, as well as the role played by the National Security Council. Sources say then National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane is considered a witness, not a target in that probe. U.S. officials say the irony in all this is that by the time any alleged bribes were discussed in 1985, Iraq had already decided to send its pipeline through Turkey instead. So Meese finds himself in trouble over a pipeline that was never built. Jim Miklashevsky,
so
NBC.
let me break down why this is an instructive case study, because if you look at the web of outside financiers that we have declassified documents around in the year 2025, 80% of the time, these outside financiers are not formal assets, but they will still be, in the sense that they're donors, they're bankers, they're hedge fund managers, and they work with the CIA, but not for the CIA, in order to arrange financings and broker deals like this. So in this case, this is again the same network. You'll notice that this was William Casey, the CIA director, who was pretty much best friends with Bruce Rappaport. So Bruce Rappaport in this case was a Swiss banker with very close ties to the Israeli defense sector and the Israeli government.
Not sketchy at all.
But you notice right off the bat, you have a very similar situation with Jeffrey Epstein, where you have Jeffrey Epstein was very close with Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak, I think 43 times went to Jeffrey Epstein's home.
Yeah, sometimes masked up pre-COVID, by the way.
Right, right. Ehud Barak was the prime minister of Israel from 98.
99
yeah, basically from 98 to the early 2000s.
Also ex-Special Forces guy.
Yes.
Involved in that. What was that?
He was the head of Amman.
That one, Operation, whatever the fuck that was called, from Munich.
Oh, yeah.
He was involved with that shit.
Yes, right. He led that special operations unit, and then he was the chief of staff for the IDF, and then he was the head of Amman, which is the military intelligence group. It's the biggest intelligence group in Israel. It's bigger than Mossad. It's bigger than Shin Bet.
Isn't that where Pollard was going through? Amman?
I think so. I think so.
Jonathan Pollard. Mm-hmm. He was handled by the dude who took down Eichmann. The fuck was that guy's name?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't remember.
But Rafi Eitan.
Oh, yeah,
handled
him
right. From Amman, I believe.
Yep.
Am I on that?
But Ehud Barak was a military juggernaut and prime minister of Israel at the same time Bill Clinton was. Bill Clinton, Jeffrey Epstein, there were at least 17 White House logs of Jeffrey Epstein visiting Bill Clinton's White House.
Through the back door.
Right. Well, at the time might have been...
Pun intended.
Yes, all right. Well, Epstein wasn't getting indicted until 2006, and so you have a lot of these, very visible meetings with high-level officials prior to that. Although Epstein would do business with Ehud Barak in 2015 with the Carbine deal. But the fact is Epstein is this kind of you see him simultaneously meeting with heads of state from the U.S. and Israel, and he appears to be brokering, at least in the 2000s, he's actively brokering investments with high-level figures from the Israeli government. In what happened in this Bruce Rappaport case was you had a U.S. juggernaut of a petroleum engineering firm, Bechtel, which has very, very close ties with the CIA since its foundation. And you can look this up, just look up the Bechtel's ties to the CIA, and you'll see all this stuff has been declassified. But you had this, big, kind of Houston oil juggernaut, which wanted this $1 billion deal, and you had the White House, National Security Council, and State Department and CIA wanting to do this deal. They they wanted this pipeline to be built and for the U.S. to get a piece of it, but they didn't want to publicly take ownership of it. They didn't want to be seen as pushing this deal forward because it would have isolated other people like Turkey. They wanted it to be built on its own, but they wanted to nudge that process. And the main issue at the time was that they were concerned that Israel would attack the pipeline because of its proximity to the Israeli border, the fact that Israel wouldn't be getting a cut of it. It would just be Iraq, Jordan, and the U.S. And so Bruce Rappaport was brought in as an outside financier with close ties to the government of Israel to strike a secret deal with Israel in the background to secure Israel's commitment not to attack. And then once that commitment was secured, the U.S. would proceed. Bechtel would be able to build the pipeline, and this would all be done through informal, deniable channels so that the U.S. would not look like it was applying its government force to broker it.
Question, outside of just bribes, in exchange for what? For Israel not attacking, what else were they going to get out of it?
Well, look up what happened the following, a couple months later, Bruce Rappaport responded to this, and I think the title of the article was Bruce Rappaport lashes out at business partner Robert Wallach over this. He actually published a whole piece on this. And basically what he said was, no, they weren't bribes. Everyone lied about this. The special prosecutor, which was invoked in order to run down this scandal, actually, there was no bribe. Instead, the government of Israel got a secret 30% cut of all the proceeds of the pipeline. So it wasn't a bribe to the Israeli Labor Party. And note even the parallels there. Bruce Rappaport was close with Shimon Peres, the head of the Israeli Labor Party. Ehud Barak was the Israeli Labor Party. It's the very same wing of the Israeli government. So here you go. And what you'll see here is that he mentions here, if you look at the cut, so the secret deal that was struck was, if you look at the third paragraph, instead Rappaport says, under a secret arrangement, Israel itself would have been made a 1/3 partner in the venture. Now, this would have
receiving a total of $65 million to $70 million a year in oil or cash. That seems like, now we're in 1988 money, so that's worth a lot more today. But that still seems like kind of low for a fucking huge oil pipeline like that, and they're a sovereign nation with a lot of money.
Well, the idea is this is going to be a 30-year pipeline, and once the infrastructure is down, it's got a chance to expand. Okay. You still, I don't know what the conversion is, but it's still going to probably net. But it's basically a third of the pipeline, and the idea is if the U.S. is looking like it's midwifing that deal through formal channels, and Turkey isn't getting a cut of it, and it could inflame Arab partners in the region to cut it could put Jordan or Iraq at odds with some of its own partners if it looks like it's secretly in bed with Israel. And so you need a middleman, a guy who's got the money and the connections in order to juice this deal in the background. while the U.S. government is covertly midwifing it, but publicly denying links to this. And this is the role. Now, Bruce Rappaport, there's a funny story. If you go back to the pipeline in high places, the high intrigue article that I think the New York Times one that you had pulled up earlier, what you'll see there is a funny rundown of what ended up happening behind the scenes in this. Yeah, this one.
This is January 31st, 1988, pipeline deal intrigue.
Yeah. So what ends up happening here is, if you just go to by Meese, Israel, the Central Intelligence Agency. If you run a search for overseas, you'll see there's something called the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Just overseas is one word.
Overseas in that article, Joe.
Yeah, in that article. Yeah, just Control F.
Yeah.
Okay.
That request prompted Bechtel to explore the idea of insurance with the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, a United States government agency that insures projects against political risks.
Yes. So this is a U.S., and I know it has the word corporation in it, but this is a U.S. government agency, a formal U.S. government agency. It's sort of got corporation in the name because it's like USAID, but for contracts for loans. And so in theory, the U.S. Treasury gets a cut of development work that's done. So today, in 2019, Trump actually changed the name of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. He merged it with another branch of USAID to create what's called the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which is the successor to this, but it's the same entity. It should be noted that the Development Finance Corporation today is being staffed by the head of it is Ben Black. Ben Black is the son of Leon Black,
the $257 million financier of Epstein for the last 7 years of his life, attached to Apollo Global.
Yes. So you can see how these networks are the same today.
God damn it.
Yes. Yeah. Leon Black paid $170 million to Epstein after the first conviction. And
they said that he's got some insane accusations against him too. Beyond that, involving some, impropriety doesn't even begin to describe.
Well, he was a big-time Republican donor, VIP at Trump's inauguration.
Oh, and that's reassuring.
And his son is now the head of this same, this same unit that's been involved in all of these things for decades.
Why is Trump doing I try to look at this, Mike, and I don't want to skip ahead here. We'll come right back to what you're saying. But when you think of every possible thing that a very, very guilty person would do in a scenario of being confronted with some accusations, Trump is doing that, and his tracks are even showing that in like a comedic way almost, he has laid the foundation of just guilt back to this Epstein guy. So much so even that now he's having health problems out of nowhere. I've seen that a million times when people are guilty. It starts overtaking your body. What the fuck is he doing?
That's a longer conversation. I have a lot of thoughts on that.
I bet you do.
I feel like getting through some of the facts of this.
All right, let's do it.
We'll make that discussion a little bit more productive. But if you want to pull this up, and this is going to get back to our USAID thing, if in a new tab, if you just pull up Ben Black, DFC, USAID, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about how this is, Epstein is not dead. The past is not dead. It's not even the past. If you just go to Google and just type in Ben Black, Leon Black, USAID, DFC, you'll see what I mean here.
I need to get Riz Verk back in here to talk about the simulation theory on this.
Yeah, if you just do that in a new tab.
He's pulling it over. Leon Black's son looks to prove himself in Washington.
Go to Google. There's a very specific one that just type in Ben Black, Leon Black, DFC, USAID.
Boom.
Yeah, go down. Benjamin Black weighs shift in USAID funding. Try that one. There you go. What will become of USAID? Yeah, just put that in.
Archive IO it.
And what you'll see is, how I was saying we had to run it through these networks because there was no USAID, for Iran-Contra, right? We couldn't just give the Contras $2 billion in USAID funding because Congress passed the Bolin Amendment banning the USAID funds for it.
We had to drop it on the ground and they picked it up.
Right. We had to run through these dark web networks. Right. And this is what I'm saying is it's the same what happens now when you don't have USAID funding for all of our covert activity in Venezuela, in Lebanon, in Ukraine? Well, welcome back to the Epstein network. So you'll see here what will become of USAID, and this is Ben Black, who is now the head of the finance side of USAID rather than the grant side. And what you'll see is a lot of this portfolio is going to be moving into the same network that ran through Iran-Contra. And so getting back to what happened with the DFC in this Iran-Contra adjacent pipeline in '88 is the DFC at the time was told by the National Security Council to put up $400 million to back this Bechtel pipeline. And the DFC said, why are you telling us to do this? This guy, Bruce Rappaport, looks super shady. Because Bruce Rappaport had his own checkered past, just like Jeffrey Epstein did. And so the National Security Council said, don't ask questions. We deal with the national security. You put up the money, And the DFC was running all these checks on Bruce Rappaport and saying, we don't want to put up $400 million for this super shady guy. So they queried the CIA and said, CIA, what files do you have? Do a name trace on Bruce Rappaport. We want to know this, whatever foreign intelligence you've collected on this, Swiss businessman with, ties to the Israeli defense sector. And the CIA produces basically like a limited hangout. What they do is they say, well, all we have on this guy are these public news clippings that we've collected over the years. But they hid from DFC that they had extensive dossiers on Bruce Rappaport and all of his dealings, their own dealings with Bruce Rappaport. And so even the government agency, now there was what they claimed is that Bruce Rappaport was not an asset. The same thing that Alex Acosta is reported to have said to the Justice Department in 2020, even though it seemed inconsistent with his reported statements in the Daily Beast. But again, we don't have the line of questions. Like Pam Bondi right now, could the Office of Professional Responsibility that did that 21-month investigation into Epstein and his intelligence ties between February 2019 and November 2021, that office reports directly to the Attorney General. So at that time, they were reporting directly to Bill Barr. Bill Barr was called by the New York Times the cover-up general for Iran-Contra. He was deeply...
Bill Barr was?
Yes. Look this up. Look up cover-up general Bill Barr, Iran-Contra. I'm telling you, it all goes back to Iran-Contra. Bill Barr, remember, Donald Barr, Bill Barr's father, recruited
Dalton
Epstein
School.
to the Dalton School to be the math and physics teacher without a degree. Yeah, and you can look
Bill
up...
Barr is the master of covering up political scandals.
And look, yeah, and if you just search the term cover-up general, maybe if you just do, it might be in this article, but the Washington Post, I think, if you just do Google and just do cover-up general, I think they had it as a front page story. Bill Barr started his career, so Donald Barr, Bill Barr's father, started his career in the CIA, it was the OSS at the time.
Yes.
Bill Barr told his high school guidance counselor his dream job was to be head of the CIA. This is in Bill Barr's autobiography, by the way. Then Bill Barr starts his career in the CIA. He works there for 6 years, and while he's getting his law degree. His first job is blocking congressional evidence about Iran-Contra. When Congress, the Democrats in Congress were trying to get a full archaeological dig on the CIA's involvement in Iran-Contra, Bill Barr was the liaison to Congress for the CIA, and he blocked it. He blocked the whole thing, and then he becomes Attorney General for George H.W. Bush, and then proceeds with all these pardons and blocking all the investigation into Iran-Contra in the early 1990s. This is why you had the Democrats, and that's why it took until the late 1990s and the John Deutsch and the Kerry reports and all this to actually get transparency on Iran-Contra, because Bill Barr had been blocking it from the Justice Department the whole time. But you have these direct links with Bill Barr and that very network because he was at the CIA during Iran-Contra. He blocked the investigation into CIA malfeasance during Iran-Contra. Epstein is running through Iran-Contra, through Southern Air Transport and through Adnan Khashoggi. And then Bill Barr is talk about putting the fox in charge of the hen house. Yeah. He's the attorney general that OPR has to report to, and he's the one shaping the OPR report on whether Epstein belonged to intelligence. But the public, I think, has a right to see that transcript. What exactly did they ask Alex Acosta? putting 4 words in quotes in a footnote, the 244th footnote. I don't believe that was the only question they asked Alex Acosta.
No way. And the way he answered it.
The way he answered it,
yeah.
I could see, if someone says the answer is no, I could see him saying, well, I was told that he belonged to intelligence, but I wasn't seeing any documents. How should I answer that? And then them saying, well, listen, if you didn't have firsthand knowledge, then you should say the answer is no. Okay, the answer is no. Great, perfect. Put that in the footnote, kill the scandal right there. We have a right to see that full transcript, what was asked, what wasn't asked. Because what wasn't asked will give you the key to what to ask now. Alex Acosta, I believe, is on the board of Newsmax now. Someone
Come on.
Yeah, look that up. Oh, here you go. Cover up General Bill Barr.
These people are like cockroaches. They never go away.
So here you see.
Is that what you want? Back in 1992, the first time Bill Barr was U.S. Attorney General, iconic New York Times writer William Safir referred to him as, quote, cover-up General Barr, unquote, because of his role in burying evidence of then-President George H.W. Bush's involvement in Iraqgate, and Iran-Contra.
He got his career, he made his bones as the Iran-Contra guy who coordinated the CIA and DOJ side of Iran-Contra. And he became Trump's attorney general while Epsteined himself, or whatever happened in the missing 2 minutes and 53 seconds of the raw footage.
That they said was not doctored at all, as if we couldn't look at fucking metadata. I mean, Jesus Christ, man.
How long does it take you to open a door? Less than 2 minutes and 53 seconds.
Oh, my God.
But so he's the guy in charge of the Justice Department while Epstein dies in prison and while they bury the investigation.
And whose father gave Epstein his start because his father, after working at OSS, just decided, you know what, the most prestigious school for children in New York City, I think I'll go be the head of that because, you know, the people that send their kids there, at least I could talk with them like it's the old days as if there's not something behind that. Of course there is.
Right. And it was Columbia before that, and Columbia in the 70s. And after he went to OSS, he went to Columbia. Columbia was where there was that first real merger between intelligence, academia, and philanthropy. You can look up.
Yeah, can you explain that?
Yeah. So in the in the late 1940s, the CIA only had, I think, 36 analysts studying Soviet.
And only 12 of them spoke
right,
Russian.
Right. And so what they did is they worked with the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, all the early foundations to pump up money into the university system. In fact, there's a great piece on this if you want to look it up. It's at the National Endowment of Humanities, I think. If you look up Philip Mosley, Cold War Organization Man.
Can Jimmy Wales stop asking me for fucking money? Just go to the CIA. They give you enough.
Yeah, well, he sort of does if you look at Jimmy Wales.
That's exactly. It's CIA-pedia. All right.
He's very close with James Clapper.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this piece is we paid for this piece to be published. This is the National Endowment for Humanities, which is a government-funded endowment. And it's called How Philip Mosley Helped Soviet Studies Moderate American Policy. And so you'll see here, in 46, you see Iron Curtain descended over Europe. They only had about, 24 experts on the Soviet Union, and even 38 Soviet analysts, only 12 of whom spoke Russian. And so what they did is it's that same network. So Donald Barr went straight from the OSS to Columbia. And what they did is they pumped up these Columbia and Harvard Russian institutes. If you just run a control F in this for intelligence. Yeah, and then go to the next hit.
Yeah, we got 5.
Yes, okay. So you'll see what happens here. So this guy, Philip Mosley, who's running the Sovietology department at Columbia, basically pioneers this nexus where Columbia University would serve as the long arm of the CIA for doing exchange programs with people in the Soviet Union, with bringing dissidents over, with getting copies of Soviet literature so that the CIA could analyze it. You'll see here, it says this sentence, sitting at the intersection of scholarship, intelligence, and philanthropy, Mosley created a field in which practitioners like himself could imagine, as Secretary of State William Rogers noted, no line between government and academic work. No line between the government and the universities. This is why I always say universities are not what they seem. There's no private market in higher education in America. Harvard was set to receive when Trump was on the day of Trump's inauguration. Harvard was owed $9 billion from the federal government in grants.
It was that high?
Yes, look up Harvard, $9 billion.
Also, can we Google Harvard size of endowment? I forget the number off the top of my head.
Like $56 billion.
Right. So why the
yes.
fuck do they need that money?
Well, they invest in the very actions that they facilitate. What they get with this money is they serve as the long arm of the State Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the U.S. military for doing the sorts of work that the U.S. does not want formal fingerprints on. This is how you have the Harvard economists going in to shape the economic reforms of Russia in the 1990s. Well, in fact, we should do a separate thing on that in a second. But even if you look up within this own article, if you just run a search for like CIA, you'll see that, like Philip Mosley, for example, or just like you'll see 25 mentions, but you'll see that he not only set up all these CIA fronts within Colombia, but he had So part of this was subsidized directly by the CIA. But you'll see that he even had how many different security clearances? If you go down a couple more, just hit the down button.
In security clearances.
Yeah, let's see. CIA Financiers. Okay, so after the CIA's proposed Eurasian Institute failed, he ended up setting up a different one. But scroll down to CIA and Rand. CIA, boom. Yeah, here you go. Here are all the security clearances that this Columbia professor held here. National Security Council, CIA, State Department, Office of Naval Research. I think they have, 9 in total? And this is all to merge Columbia with the Central Intelligence Agency. Do you know what Hillary Clinton, where she's employed right now? She's employed by University of Columbia. They have something called... Where's Mike Pompeo right now?
Columbia?
The University of Columbia. The CIA director...
half of them's gone. I don't know if you've seen him lately.
Yeah, that's
that
true.
Ozempic's hitting, baby.
But, and so where's Victoria Nuland now? Where's she employed?
Oh, no.
The University of Columbia.
No.
And not only that, they're all at the exact same place.
God damn it.
Type in Columbia SIPA, S-I-P-A. This is the School of International Public Affairs. Look this up, and specifically within that, it's the Institute of Global Politics. But all of the major universities, if you want to make it big as a university, your biggest customer is not the students paying you $60K in tuition. It's the federal government, because you are running centers and institutes out of there that are helping a CIA operation or a State Department operation. Yeah, so this is the place. It's got Victoria Nuland, Hillary Clinton, Mike Pompeo, and a bunch of other CIA operatives on USAID payroll like Maria Ressa. But you can just type in Mike Pompeo, Hillary Clinton, Victoria Nuland. You'll see they're all there. They went straight from Victoria Nuland was the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. That's the head of the political section. That's number 3 at the State Department. The JFK files showed. Yes, here you go. So Columbia
That's an old
SIPA.
shot of him, though.
Yeah, it's true. Yes, he's.
There's a lot of
less
Papa
pixels
Johns
now.
ago.
But they're all there. The Victoria Nuland ran the CIA side of the State Department. Arthur Schlesinger in 1961, in his 15-page memo to JFK, he was the senior White House advisor to JFK. JFK gets in 61. They immediately have a problem with the CIA. Bay of Pigs, all the Cuba stuff. JFK wanted to go on a different foreign policy track. His top advisor writes him a 15-page memo. This all got declassified in March with the JFK files. It's an incredible memo, and it's called, the title of it is called CIA Reorganization. And what Schlesinger says to JFK is, if we don't reorganize the CIA, you will not be able to administer U.S. foreign policy, because the State Department is being co-opted by the CIA. And one of the ways they do this is by control of the political affairs branch of the State Department. So I was in the Economic Bureau for State. That's, things around trade. We have another bureau for political affairs. And this has to do with the domestic political affairs in a foreign country. So every embassy will have a political section. The political section is actually the most powerful section in every embassy. The head of the political section for any embassy acts as the charge d'affaires when the head of the embassy is out. So the ranking order is, U.S. ambassador, then deputy, and then head of political affairs. Now, what Schlesinger told JFK in this memo in 61 was that on the day of JFK's inauguration, 48% of all State Department, quote, employees in the political section were not actually State Department employees at all. They were CIA under diplomatic cover. And so while they were parked at a U.S. embassy, they did not answer in the chain of command within the State Department. They were covert operatives for organized political warfare being carried out by the CIA. But because they dominated the political section of the State Department, they could set their own political policy for the country. If the State Department did not want to overthrow that regime, but the political section wanted, the CIA did, then the CIA could simply use the bandwidth of the political section of the embassy to make contact with the various dissident groups, to run money to them, to help them logistically, to connect them, and run a parallel operation without it observing the typical White House National Security Council chain of command. And he gave examples where he said in some embassies, 80% of the political affairs staff are CIA, not even State Department at all. In fact, who was Joe Biden's CIA director? Bill Burns. What was Bill Burns before he became head of the CIA?
A buddy of Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, yes. In the 1990s, Bill Burns was the head of the political section for the U.S. Embassy in Russia, in Moscow. So he ran the CIA. Bill Burns, we're told, never worked a day at the CIA in his whole life before he was handed the reins to be the CIA director. Right? He was a State Department guy the whole time. But where was he at State? He was the head of the political affairs section for Russia in the 1990s when we were running the whole Harvard operation, which we should get to after this. But the second part of this,
I don't know where to go with this guy, bro. It's like just 4 trains at any one time.
But then Bill Burns was the head of the entire political affairs branch of the State Department before he became Deputy Secretary of State. But he ran the CIA side of the State Department until 2014, when he then met with Epstein 3 times when he went on to run the Carnegie Endowment, which again puts Epstein right there. How's Epstein, while he's working out deals with Ehud Barak, this is right at the time of the Carbine investments and all this, he's simultaneously meeting
all
with
post-conviction, by the way.
Right, all post-conviction, and being funded by Leon Black at the time. But he's meeting with the guy who ran the entire CIA side of the State Department, who's then presumably meeting with Epstein to get funding for the Carnegie Endowment. I mean, I don't think Bill Burns was participating in trafficking or necessarily, I don't think he was going to Epstein for girls. He went to his...
that's reassuring.
What I'm saying is you go to Epstein for money. You tap into the donor network around Epstein. But who was the Undersecretary for Political Affairs while Bill Burns at State, while Bill Burns was CIA director? It was Victoria Nuland. And now Victoria Nuland is at Columbia, where they merged the intelligence world with academia and outside funding from the foundations. And that's where Donald Barr went right after the OSS. Right as the CIA was pumping up Columbia, he goes right to Columbia and then to the Dalton School where they recruit Epstein. But on the Harvard thing, there's a great, if you go to The Nation, if you go to Google and you type in The Nation, the Harvard Boys Do Russia, the article is called. And this is a great example of like how this works.
That's a great title.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And there's a million pieces on this, even in the Harvard Crimson.
They got Harvard on Harvard Crime.
Yeah.
Good for them. All right.
Yeah.
Nice work, Crimson.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Harvard Boys Do Russia. After 7 years of economic quote-unquote reform financed by billions of dollars in the U.S. This is, when is this from, Deef? 1998?
Yeah. So we were privatizing Russia at the time. Russia threw up the white flag, in 91.
Yep.
Yeltsin basically puts, his whole trust in the U.S. government to make Russia a small L liberal Western democracy and to privatize the trillions of dollars in state-held assets. The entire Soviet Union, was basically under a communist government structure. It was all held publicly.
Yep.
So it's being sold off to Wall Street in London, and it's being done by Harvard University by way of USAID. So type in, for example, Harvard Institute.
Was Larry Summers involved with this?
Yes, Larry Summers and Jeffrey
Always
Sachs.
is.
So Essential. So Chubais was basically the U.S. aligned oligarch that we ran through much. This is Anatoly Chubais, a darling of U.S. and Western financial establishments. He was the oligarch that we, in addition to a few other folks that we can get to, that we ran the Harvard, USAID, CIA op through here in order to privatize Russia's economy and sell it off to Harvard University and George Soros. So essential to the not even joking. Essential to the implementation of Chubais' policies were the enthusiastic support of the Clinton administration, and who was, remember, 1998, Ehud Barak is the prime minister of Israel. Jeffrey Epstein is visiting the Clinton White House 17 times, and you have this whole sort of Russia. We'll get to that in a sec. So, and its key representative for foreign economic assistance in Moscow, the Harvard Institute for International Development. Okay, so this was who the Clinton White House was deputizing to go into Russia and get them to privatize and set up legal and economic reforms that the State Department wanted. We tapped the Harvard Institute of International Development to do that. Now, if that name sounds familiar, what does the AID sound for? What does the AID stand for in USAID? It's the U.S. Agency for International Development. Yeah. This is Harvard's version of it, the Harvard Institute for International Development.
Institute, agency, same shit, different
and in
word.
fact, they were funded by USAID to do this.
Oh, I love that.
This is how the waterfall, this is how the structure is, right? So the Harvard Institute for International Development, using the prestige of Harvard's names and connections in the admin, Harvard Institute of International Development officials acquired virtual carte blanche over the U.S. economic aid program to Russia with minimal oversight by the government agencies involved. This is how you have plausible deniability, minimal oversight. With this access and their close alliance with Chubais and his circle, they allegedly profited on the side, and we'll get to how this happened. Yet few Americans are aware of the Harvard Institute of International Development's role in Russian privatization and its role in taxpayer funds. Now, before we get to this next section, let me do a little bit of world building here. Okay, so you're going to see that this is the U.S.-Russian Investment Symposium at Harvard's Kennedy School. Where was Epstein most active within Harvard? Go to Google, pull up a Google image of Jeffrey Epstein, Harvard.
Alan Dershowitz's office?
Well, the Harvard Kennedy School in particular. He gave millions of dollars through the Wexner Foundation, specifically to the Harvard Kennedy Center. The Harvard Kennedy Center is what is used to do government reforms. Yes, so these are millions of dollars that Epstein gave to the Harvard Kennedy School. In fact, if you want to know another really fun thing on this, type in, pull up a new tab and go to New York Post. New York Post, Gary Kasparov, Sudan.
Kasparov with a K.
Yeah, with a K. Sudan, Harvard.
It's going to be good enough.
Yeah, there you go. Jane Street coup. Is this the... Okay, we'll pull up that first one.
Why is it pulling up all the SBF stuff?
Okay, here you go. All right, so look at this.
Wall Street Titan.
Yeah, no,
wait, go back to that.
That's the
Go
one.
back to that show.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Wall Street Titan who hired SBF defrauded into spending $7 million on AK-47s, grenades for South Sudan coup plot.
Let's talk about this. All right.
So the suit's coming off. Shit's getting real.
So this is super, super recent, okay? And we're going to come back to the Russia story in a sec, Russia and Harvard. Because, actually, one more thing before I talk about this. I'm sorry, one more tab. Penny Pritzker, Harvard Corporation. Who's running Harvard right now? Penny Pritzker, Harvard Corporation. And then you can see that, you can just, if you pull that up right now, just so everyone can see that I'm not making this up. So she is currently running the Harvard Corporation, the hedge fund on top of Harvard University. Now,
the hedge fund.
Yes. Now, yes, because that's the endowment. They wash this all through. They invest in hedge fund and private equity and alternative asset funds. That's how they make the money on their $56 billion endowment. So now type Penny Pritzker, Ukraine reconstruction, because I want to connect this so it's not ancient history. I'm going to show you how Harvard is doing today what Harvard was doing in the 1990s, running the same operation. So Penny Pritzker, while she was the head of the Harvard Corporation, running the investments of the Harvard Management Fund, was simultaneously serving as the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine's economic recovery, starting in September 2023. This is the same thing Harvard was doing to make billions of dollars for the Harvard Endowment in Russia.
Yeah.
So I just want to pull that up so that when we go back to to put the button on the Harvard Kennedy School, go back to that one right there. So here's what happened. We again have this Russia and Harvard for CIA covert action. So what happened here was you have this co-founder of Jane Street, which is this major Wall Street trading firm.
Where SBF got his start.
Right, where SBF got his start. And what you'll see here is by way of Garry Kasparov was
the chess player.
Well, the chess player who became the CIA State Department-backed opposition figure in Russia in the early 2000s. They ran him for president. He became the head of all these, USAID, NGOs in Russia. He was an early Putin dissident in the early 2000s, using the clout of his international fame. Now he's been living in New York, I think, for the past decade and some. But what you'll see here is this was an operation to run guns to Sudan. And what happened was these, so if you scroll down, I'm going to walk you through this. Okay, so you have Granieri, 53, allegedly provided $7 million in two payments after meeting with an AJAC at a Midtown Manhattan condominium.
In 2024.
Yes, and that his financing was vital to the plan. And if you scroll down, I'll say, okay, so he's a longtime supporter of human rights causes, and he thought that he was just paying for human rights affairs in Sudan. So if you scroll down, the case also references chess champion Garry Kasparov, though he's not named as a defendant in a wrongdoing. AJAC, a former child soldier in Sudan, who resettled in the U.S. and studied at Harvard's Kennedy School and worked as a World Bank economist before becoming a South Sudanese opposition activist. He and Keach, the other guy from Harvard Kennedy School who get rolled up in this, met with an undercover agent and for weapons in a Phoenix warehouse. And if you scroll down one more time, this is where your aid money is buying. So defense attorneys allege U.S. authorities were aware of the plan, citing a public authority defense and claiming the State Department told AJAC in October 2023 it would not support a non-democratic regime change. They accused, so basically they say the financing was allegedly arranged through meetings, including at Paul Weiss, go down one more.
The law firm.
Yes, and what you'll see is basically these two, the financier, the outside financier, and if you scroll down to the Kasparov reference, you'll see, basically Kasparov is also at the Harvard Kennedy School, where he's been running these anti-Putin ops for about 20 years now. He'd been working with the Kennedy School since the early 2000s. And so Kasparov introduces these two, Sudanese opposition activists who are also getting, fellows getting paid by the Harvard Kennedy School to work with this outside financier to get money for guns so that Sudanese rebels can use them, presumably, to kill Russians in the area, or at least Russian-backed rebel groups, because right now we're in a proxy war with Russia over much of Africa. A bunch of these U.S. and French-backed governments in Africa have been toppled by what are seen as Russian coups. We give money and arms to groups in Niger and Chad and Cote d'Ivoire and Sudan. Russia is making a play for those same minerals and those same natural resources, and so they back rebel groups as well. And so we need to run guns to the Sahel is the big belt in Africa that this runs through. So we're doing sort of Iran-Contra for Sudanese and Ivory Coast and Niger rebel groups.
Is that how you say it? Niger?
Yeah.
I'm always so afraid to say. I just point to that one on the map.
Keep it safe.
That one, yeah.
But it's running through Harvard University here. And so back to what Harvard was doing in the 1990s, if you go back to that first article we were on.
Joe's been cooking today.
Yeah. It's the Harvard Boys Do Russia one. There you go. Okay. So you'll see that Harvard was running the economic aid, and because of this, you couldn't FOIA them. Because it's run.
You couldn't FOIA them?
Well, they're not a government agency.
Oh, that's right.
This is how
Shell company, basically.
Right. This is exactly how CISA at DHS structured the censorship work. They said, "Oh, well, we're hiring Stanford University to to do this work, and you can't. They're private universities, so you can't get the public documents unless they're subpoenaed by Congress or come out in a lawsuit." But you see what happens here is if you go to USAID in this, you'll see what happened was USAID then funds the Harvard Institute for International Development to do this. So you have the U.S. government paying Harvard to advance U.S. government causes, and what does Harvard get out of it? Well, type in Soros. Just Control F for Soros here. Okay, so here's what happened. In 1995, Chubais, that's the U.S.-friendly Russian oligarch, organized insider auctions of prime national properties. The Harvard Management Company, which invests the university's endowment, and billionaire speculator George Soros were the only foreign entities allowed to participate. The Harvard Management Company and Soros became significant shareholders in Russia's second largest steel mill, as well as in Sudanko Oil, whose reserves exceed those of Mobil. This is ExxonMobil. Harvard Management Corporation and Soros also invested in Russia's high-yield IMF subsidized, domestic bond market. So basically, these are insider auctions. Harvard gets paid by the government to do this, and then they get first pick. They get insider trading on the very CIA, USAID ops they're tasked to do. This is the business model of Harvard. This is why people say that Harvard is a hedge fund with a university attached, because they are insiders. They're on the ground. They're the ones who are using the backing of the U.S. government to coerce foreign leaders to make economic changes to their entire industrial structure, and then they get close hold, insider, no competition bids on the very assets that they are commanding foreign governments to privatize. They ran the same operation in Ukraine, and Soros, who also, through the Open Society, and you'll see USAID is there too if you look at the bottom. According to Williamson, the U.S. assistance program in Russia was rife with such conflicts of interest involving the Harvard Institute of International Development and their USAID-funded Chubais allies. Harvard Management Corporation managers favored Russian bankers, Soros, and insider expatriates working in Russia's nascent markets.
Now, obviously, it didn't work out, and a lot of the players that got involved with this are straight up corrupt, and the ways that it was set up, I would argue, are straight up corrupt, and I'm not sure there's any good evidence against that. At the front end of it, though, before they made all those mistakes to do that, do you think that when a quote-unquote enemy like the Soviet Union topples after whatever it was, like 70 years, 75 years in 91, do you think that there is a use for something like a USAID, or not even USAID, just like the U.S. government to have some form of trying to get soft power over there to ensure that the next regime is better than the last, which obviously they failed miserably at, but the idea of doing something like that might make sense?
Yeah, I don't even fight that battle.
Yeah.
I totally see both sides of it. I think different schools of foreign policy thought, everyone's got a reasonable position on this in terms of the role of covert action versus, if you don't do it, you see the territory to Russia, China, the like. The issue is in order to get around the handcuffs that are put on the intelligence agencies, they end up co-opting outside institutions who we do business with. We are paying $9 billion to Harvard University until Trump just put them through the ringer with a lot of these cuts. $9 billion of our tax money goes to Harvard, and that's not so that Harvard can, research the impact of climate change on squirrels. They are an arm of the CIA, and what happens when you become so, because they always call this the third option, right? You don't want to go to war with the country, but you don't want to leave it alone entirely. So covert action is like the third option. We're in there, we're influencing things, but we're not committing huge amounts of money, but we're in the game secretly. And the problem is in order to structure that covert action so that it doesn't have U.S. government fingerprints, and because the CIA, does not really do these proprietaries anymore, you end up having to use other pieces on the chessboard that we all know and interact with, whether that's the unions, like the AFL-CIO, the biggest union in America, which has been, the union arm of the CIA since the 1950s.
The union arm of the CIA. You started to talk about this last time.
Yeah.
But can you expand upon that?
Well, it used to be called the AFL-CIA.
Yeah.
Yeah. So unions are muscle. They're street muscle. They also control logistics. They control the ports. They control the trucks. They control, the roads. If we want to get this happened while I was at State, Belarus. In Belarus, in the summer of 2020, we tried to run a regime change operation against Lukashenko, who was, the head, called the last dictator of Europe is what we always called him. Belarus was very closely aligned with Russia. How did we run the attempted color revolution against Lukashenko in 2020? We went straight to the unions. We went to the National Endowment for Democracy's Solidarity Center. That's named after the Solidarity Movement in Poland, which was the union workers group in Poland under Lech Walesa that toppled the Soviet government during the Cold War. And, this has all come out declassified. The CIA was running black duffel bags of cash to the Solidarity movement. That was a CIA-funded union group, union movement. It relies on masses of workers taking to the streets, and because the unions are how industry is effectuated through labor, if the unions all agree to walk out and boycott, then the whole country shuts down. Well, our strategy whenever we are trying to do a bottom-up revolution, as opposed to a top-down military coup, if we do a people-powered color revolution, is to get masses of people to take to the street, shut down the roads, shut down the industry, so there's nothing for the dictator to weaponize. They can't, there's no economy pumping into the country because nobody's getting paid. The hospitals aren't working because the hospital workers have all run out. The schools aren't working because the teachers' unions have all walked out. There's no oil in the country because all the oil workers have all walked out. There's no mining in the country because all the mining workers have all walked out. And so the whole country shuts down. Now there's no money to pay the police. There's no money to pay the military. And so you can't even pay for people to contain the riots because there's no more capital for the dictator to use, while these same union groups are surrounding the Parliament building and throwing Molotov cocktails in police cars in a peaceful protest.
Very peaceful.
Right. So we use, the union stuff really grew out of, before it was really taken over in large part by the intelligence and military sphere, there was a very robust community organizing apparatus in the early 1900s through the 1920s with union groups. And it was, you had this labor versus management. And in order to stop that, you needed a counter union force that would go in and break up those protests, that would have its own. This is how you get involvement with organized crime groups. And you have the CIA moving through these unions for right-wing Cold War activity. And this
Fast forward to the 90s.
Right, in the 1950s. And by the way, note, where was Alex Acosta? What was his position in the Trump cabinet?
Labor.
Yeah, labor is the unions. It's the Department of Labor is who funds we have an international affairs branch of the Department of Labor, and they give tens of millions of dollars to AFL-CIO affiliates so that their branch in Belarus will take to the streets. Their branch in Brazil will help the Workers' Party leader there, I'll just say. And in Germany, you can look this up. This came out in the JFK files, the fully declassified version of this, but even look at the teachers' unions. So Randi Weingarten, who's the head of the American Federation of Teachers, what was she doing in Ukraine, a dozen times during the... Look up Randi Weingarten in Ukraine.
When was she in Ukraine?
Oh, 2022, 2023, 2024. When we took over Ukraine in 2014, one of the first things we made Yatsenyuk do is turn over the Ministry of Education to an EU credentialing body.
And we sent Randy over there to give a little consultation.
Now look this up. Look up CIA I think start with $1 million to the National Education Association. There you go. The first one on CIA.gov. This one? Yeah. Now this is just one alone. So this is in 67. You'll see. Now the National Education Association, and so there were two groups that got $1 million through this, but this is just through this one op alone. So a couple things. The World Confederation of Organizations of the Teaching Profession was funded by a CIA proprietary fund called the Vernon Fund, and this all got busted. The Vernon Fund was a sort of George Bush family adjacent Houston CIA oil mafia ring. And during the Cold War, we wanted to make sure that the educational materials that were taught in schools around the world tilted towards pro-U.S. rather than pro-communist education. And at the time, there was a threat perceived that communist and Marxist groups were infiltrating the schools. And so in order to make sure that the teachers' unions were successful in winning sort of pro-U.S., pro-capitalist teaching materials, we needed to capacity build our teachers' unions in order to make sure that the teaching materials and the policy and the personnel around major teaching umbrella groups were pro-U.S., pro-capitalist, etc. Yeah. Now, the National Education Association, who got $1 million, again, this is directly from CIA at the time, that's the biggest teachers' union umbrella group in the entire country. The AFL-CIO is the biggest union group in the country. These are not, Harvard University is the most prestigious university with the largest endowment in the entire country. You are not instrumentalizing small private charter planes like Southern Air Transport in doing this. You are fundamentally changing the relationship that everyday Americans have with the most salient and visible institutions in their own society when you run covert action this way. But because they are the biggest, they have the most reach, they have the most contacts, they have the most pull. So there's a natural temptation to do this. But what it ends up doing is creating this giant schizophrenia in the American mind, where people sense something is off about Harvard. Something is off about the unions, which are not representing the interests of the rank and file. There's this mysterious leadership class that seems to drive around in $1 million sports cars, and nobody knows what they do. But this is because because covert action is supposed to be, initially, it was supposed to sort of be a weapon of last resort if there was no other way to...
Oh, that went out the window right away.
It did. It did. But this was the idea was that we would create this capacity even if we didn't need to use it in case a regime really went south. But what it ended up becoming was just totally commonplace. And now, whether it's our tech companies or our teachers' unions or our random university X, I mean, it's all the way down to the most... From the major, you can't find a major university who's not wrapped up in this, whether it's Harvard or MIT or Stanford, all the way down to Florida International University, where Alex Acosta was the dean of the law school, which is now hosting the same way that Columbia has Mike Pompeo and Victoria Nuland and Hillary Clinton. Florida International University, which was its law school, is run by Alex Acosta, the Epstein prosecutor. They now host Juan Guaido, who's teaching there. Marina Corina Machado runs the democracy thing. We have blended our above board institutions with this covert action apparatus, and now you can't even reform the institutions without stepping on a CIA rattlesnake.
All right, hold on 1 second. Let's back that up. I don't disagree with that point, especially at the highest level institutions. When you look across all colleges, which I think we can all agree have a lot of problems right now, that's a whole other rabbit hole. A guy like Acosta, not the best guy to bring in, obviously, just because of what we've seen painted on his resume vis-a-vis this whole Epstein thing. That said, big name, draw for the university. He then naturally is going to bring in a few other people that also maybe have some stains on their resume that you mentioned that you don't want to have in there. Nonetheless, if that's like 4 names right there at a place that has 350 legit professors, I'm making up numbers right here, but if it's something like that, I would say those things can be a little bit more accidental collateral damage with poor oversight, because universities are trying to get people, as opposed to like primary school and high school and stuff like that. In universities, they are really trying to get people who have, instead of taking a career just as a teacher, who have also accomplished many things in the world themselves, only to come back to kind of teach those experiences. So they're going to naturally, therefore, just like any other company hiring people, going to run into some hires where, you know, ooh, in hindsight 2020, we shouldn't have made that one.
Right.
That's fair to, is that fair to say across a lot of these places, as opposed to where that is a way higher percentage of the time, it would seem like, when you look at like a Harvard, a Columbia, Yale, and stuff like that?
Yeah, I can totally see that. And again, FIU, Florida International University, is well positioned for that sort of thing because they're in Miami. I used to live right next to it pretty much. It's, you know, that you have all these exchange students, you have all these touch points with the whole Operation Mongoose, you know, region. And so it's a natural place to synergize that type of work. The issue is what happens. I don't know that I have a problem if it's genuinely in U.S. interests, you know, with the pre-2016 work. In theory, you know, at least you can make a colorable defense of it. But what happened in 2016 is all of these same networks began weaponized against the person and the movement that democratically elected the U.S. government. They went from weaponizing this against foreign communism to domestic populism. They argued that just like communism is a threat to democracy, because, you know, it inverts all of the civil liberties and freedoms and economic, you know, liberalization that is possible under American capitalism. They argued that populism was a threat to democracy, and so they used these same networks. Look at what these institutions are doing now. Look at what the National Education Association is doing now. They're if you just go to X and you just look at, they just passed a whole web of resolutions that they would resist Trump on every front, that they would not cooperate, you know, with his you know, ICE policy on illegal immigration and the like. You look at what AFL-CIO is doing now. They're sponsoring riots. The AFL-CIO had a secret agreement with the Chamber of Commerce to shut down D.C. if Trump won the election in 2020. The AFL-CIO makes more money in government grants than they do in members' dues. They get like $72 million in grants from the federal government. They only get like $68 million or so from dues. They are funded more by taxpayers than they are by their own, you know, revenue stream. You know, so what happens when you have a government that the people democratically vote for? Yeah, and you'll see, like, you know, there's dozens of these. You have a problem where our biggest institutions are dependent on this government money to keep going. But we have conflated them. When it became okay as an op to target Trumpism the same way they targeted communism, by arguing that populism is a threat to democracy, anything that undermines our institutions, weakens American democracy. But then these institutions are serving as the scope of the CIA rifle. Then you have a covert society almost that is totally usurping the democratic will of voters. And then you end up having to destroy our own institutions in order to you have to destroy our own institutions in order to reform them. And you destroy Harvard University, you destroy our unions, you destroy our healthcare system who gets billions of dollars in USAID. Then you make the argument, well, now China is going to step into the void of that. Harvard is, what do you do if you're Harvard and you have $9 billion in grants that's a huge proportion of which is to advance some international agenda, whether that's on the energy sphere and the green energy transition, whether that's on seizing Eurasia and all the CIA work in Ukraine and Russia. And you've got the Harvard Endowment, who's made all these illiquid investments through their alternative asset funds in Ukraine reconstruction, because Penny Pritzker is simultaneously the head of Ukraine reconstruction and the head of the Harvard Corporation. They can't just turn that Titanic without decimating their own business model. Yes. And so because this has become so wrapped up in statecraft, what happens if the people vote for a different vision of statecraft? Either these institutions have to either that entire CIA State Department iceberg has to agree to surrender and all these investments go to zero because now their business model is dependent on it, or we have to crush them as the federal government because you can't subsidize the thing that is destroying your entire operational policy.
It's like a gambler that gets way too far into a hand, right? Like maybe at the tip of the spear here, when some of these patterns formed, I'll even go all the way back at the beginning of CIA, and they're like, wait, we're really worried the Russians are going to drop a nuke on us. So they therefore then give that final potential end result of as the reason to say like, yeah, you know, we'll color outside the lines a little bit, and it's a slippery slope. You keep going farther and farther and farther until now the shrub has grown so big that like you can't cut it down. You got to burn the whole fucking forest down. And that's where it gets weird, because you and I had this conversation last time, even with something like USAID, you've said it. And people criticize you for saying this, which is hilarious. You're like, listen, I'm calling out all the horrible shit they did and all the illegal shit they did and all the fucking shell company shit they did for CIA, but I'm not saying that every fucking thing they did was bad. But the problem is now people hear all these bad things, and I get it. People out there are like, good, burn the whole thing down. And it's like, how do we get that pendulum back to where, you know, as much as we may not like government bureaucracy, the parts of it that are supposed to be organizationally functional have the ability to function. I mean, shit, if I had the answer to that, you and I wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Well, you have to break the halo. This has been my strategy on this, which is you have to break the angelic halo over the thing that prevents any inquiry into it.
Yeah.
You can't motivate Congress to subpoena these guys. You can't motivate lawsuits to break open documents in discovery. You can't motivate, voters to stampede on social media for reform unless they are charged up about the things that it has done wrong, because these things are always given a pretty name. Who's against international development? Who's against humanitarian assistance? So you do have to give it its moment. I mean, this is, and I come back to the Church Committee hearings. I mean, the iconic vision of that was Frank Church holding up a CIA heart attack gun.
Yeah.
And
can we pull that up? We mentioned it earlier.
And it's such an iconic image. You're like, okay, we were told that the CIA is there to protect us and to keep us safe.
What a shot.
And this thing is effectively a dart gun to murder someone, but then fool criminal forensics investigators so that it looks like the CIA didn't kill him. It looks like they died of a heart attack. You see that and you go, oh my God, my cousin died of a heart attack. Was he secretly? You have to break the halo on this in order. It doesn't mean every time someone dies of a heart attack, they were killed by the CIA. But what it means is you would not have the handcuffs. The CIA didn't even have assassinations banned until the 1970s. There was no presidential finding requirement for the president to have to approve of covert action before this. And we are right now, we have the patient on the operating table. There is a Democratic mandate from the last election. There is a huge domestic groundswell, and then tons of foreign allies who have come out and said, thank God, USAID, you've had governments that I think are allied with the Trump administration, from El Salvador to Poland to Hungary to even Mexico. The president of Mexico came out and supported the shutdown of USAID. And
Sheinbaum did?
Yeah. You can look up Sheinbaum, her comments on the closure of USAID, and because this thing had a halo wrapped around it for so long. Yes, you publicly supported the shutdown of USAID, right? And how much do we say we do there because we're supposed to be helping the people, but everyone knows what it is. At a certain point, if USAID is going to be an independent agency, it has to have its credibility. And there may come a day where the State Department rolls out another separate aid agency after putting it through the reforms. But you had 14,000 employees there under USAID, and you just look at something like the DRG side of USAID. That was the Bureau for Democracy, Rights, and Governance. That was a full-scale shop for for regime change. USAID had an office called OTI, the Office of Transition Initiatives. And you can look up what the New York Times wrote about OTI. If you just type, I think 2014 New York Times Office of Transition Initiatives. That is a USAID full office dedicated to regime change. How do you justify, how do you maintain international credibility when you are all but explicitly saying, yeah, this aid is going to overthrow your government? You want some aid? And they wrapped this all up. Hillary Clinton warped USAID in such a perverted way. She had this concept called the 3Ds, the defense, diplomacy, and development. And she made the argument that USAID has to have an equal position on the board as the Department of Defense and Department of State in every theater USAID operates. Under Obama, USAID had all these new coordinating councils so that every single theater that USAID operates in has to be constantly coordinated with the Pentagon, with intelligence, with the State Department, so that if you're doing a USAID jobs fair in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, in places, you're getting me now. All over the world, wherever it is, that you need to make sure that that is synchronizing whatever the special forces are doing in the region, whatever the CIA is doing in the region. It inverts. This is bad cover at this point. Either you need to lie to the American people about what it's doing, or you're truthful with the American people, and therefore every other government on earth which reads our news or reads our own newspapers or government press releases knows what that thing is really doing and doesn't want it for that purpose, or they have to accept it reluctantly, because if you want to punt on your IMF loan, you have to accept this USAID money, which is just basically a U.S. influence note. This is what's happening in Ukraine right now. Yeah. Look at Zelensky. This week, you can even watch. They're surrounding. I don't know if it's Zelensky's residence or it's one of the big government buildings in Ukraine. This week, you see these U.S. news institutions that have loved Zelensky pretty much in an unqualified way since 2019, pretty much. And they are now calling Zelensky a dictator because he ran raids on the Anti-Corruption Action Network in Ukraine. See if you can pull up the Ukraine anti-corruption protests this week in Ukraine.
Stuff like this doesn't happen by accident.
No, but these protests, they're going after Zelensky not because he's anti-Trump, not because but because he's going after one of the USAID controlled. This group that they raided, the Anti-Corruption Action Network, is funded by USAID in order to...
Well, what's it funded by now? If USAID is closed as of July 1, it's just sucked into the State Department, so it's funded by the State Department?
Yeah, or it could have lingering grants.
Okay.
And they also could be, I'm sure they're jointly funded by the EU and NATO, societal resilience. And a lot of this is also going to have Ministry of Foreign Affairs funding from like Germany's version of the State Department, the UK's version of the State Department. A lot of this is cross-pollinated in a transatlantic way where the U.S. will, it's like NATO funding. The U.S. will provide most of it, but they will get a transatlantic network of investors, to go fund it. But this is one of the ways that we keep Zelensky in line is we have like anti-corruption groups. So if Zelensky goes too far, these groups will write hit pieces. We will talk to our prosecutor assets. We'll give...
Our prosecutor assets.
Well, this was, look at Victor Shokin.
Yeah.
What did Joe Biden say? Son of a bee. He was gone the next day. Because what? Because we threatened Ukraine with
Shut it down.
We had $1 billion governance reform loan from USAID to the government of Ukraine. We said, if you want that $1 billion in USAID money, you got to get rid of the prosecutor who's looking into the company that my son is on the board of. Son of a bee, Joe Biden says to the Council on Foreign Relations. He was gone the next day. We control the prosecutor. We fund the prosecutors. USAID has rule of law programs. We've given millions of dollars to the Ministry of Justice in Ukraine to implement these anti-corruption reforms. But what's happening here is, this is a control node. If Zelensky goes too far, if he doesn't do what we say, then we can get a special prosecutor on his butt inside of Ukraine, the same way we got a special prosecutor on Trump's butt with the Mueller probe around Russiagate. But Zelensky made the mistake of, he wanted total control over power. Elections have been banned in Ukraine for the past 3 years. Zelensky was supposed to either leave office or be subject to another vote a year ago. So
I will never leave.
He's banned 19 different political parties, just outright banned them. But now he is doing the Noriega thing. He's getting a little bit too nationalistic for his own britches. Noriega was a CIA asset. He had a human 201 file before he became president, and then we said, "Oh my God, we've been running drugs through you, on your way to power." But
no way.
I'm shocked to find now you still continue to deal in drugs after you've become the president. And you're threatening to nationalize the Panama Canal. So, what I'm saying is there's always going to be this function. We're always going to have this control mechanism. You don't want to be a country who is not able to influence the course of events in. It's easy to say no covert action at all while you're enjoying low gas prices, cheap products, and it looks like all your major, Fortune 500 companies are just best in class. ExxonMobil is the biggest oil company in the world. That's because ExxonMobil is so good. No, that's because Rex Tillerson didn't become Secretary of State because he had a long storied career working his way up the State Department. It's because ExxonMobil is a outgrowth of the U.S. State Department. We didn't have cheap bananas in this country because our banana companies are so good. It's because we used the Department of War to seize Guatemala and Nicaragua. And
I do like bananas, though. I was okay with that one.
This is what I'm saying.
So I'll throw that out there.
It's easy to say don't do any of this when you are living in the legacy of it and you have been the beneficiary of it and you've never experienced what it's like to be a small, isolated country who does not have these capacities in place. But at some point, it goes too far. At some point, you're applying to we're trying to de-Wokify, Harvard right now. Republicans are, conservatives are. We're trying to. You look at something like Columbia University, which is in the crosshairs right now. Columbia gets I think $400 million or something in government grants. And you've got Columbia University was a big outgrowth of Democrat foreign policy on Iran. The Columbia Foreign Policy Network, the Middle East Studies, was a big part of this, and so was Harvard around foreign policy around the Iran deal. Opening up Iran, relieving international sanctions, so that we could profit from the world's second largest supply of oil and third largest supply of gas, and we could exert influence over Iran as opposed to some of its allies with China and the like. But what happens when Colombia itself gets caught in that proxy war? Like when institutions become arms of the state, that is not a small thing, and especially you can start small because we have some crisis that's popping off, and they're the ones positioned to do it. But as these Jenga towers scale over years and decades, you lose sight of the fact that it's supposed to be a university. It's supposed to be teaching what is the core function of something when it gets so deep in statecraft that any attempt to reform its fundamental function is going to interfere with its government function.
That's right.
What's happening at Columbia University right now is, and I don't even agree with the reason Trump is going after it. I don't think that this predicate around going after it on anti-Semitism grounds syncs well with a lot of the free speech diplomacy that the Trump administration is trying to do.
It doesn't at all, but there's a huge double standard when it comes to Israel with this administration. It's just how it is.
And part of the issue is Columbia was getting a lot of this grant work, and their Middle East Studies program is because the Israeli government was the big blocker on the Iran deal. So you have all of these, these webs of influence. I mean, this was something that even Ehud Barak was involved in when he was working with the Jake Sullivan West Exec Network, and Avril Haines and all those State Department in waiting folks. and Bill Burns. Bill Burns was the lead negotiator on the Iran deal. But the problem is now Colombia, if you are trying to, like, for example, like the DEI thing does get connected. This is one of these strange alliances between like the base of MAGA world and a lot of the kind of, donor networks where you have, commonalities. For example, like the foreign policy side of Trump world is very focused on Israel. The domestic policy side is mostly focused on things like anti-wokeness and investing in our own infrastructure and the like. And there are places that they meet in a very tangential way, like around the universities.
That's right.
And so you have like Columbia University. There's this weird phenomenon that's happened where it's like the administration that the people voted for do not want their kids indoctrinated in this like crazy DEI woke stuff. But there is a natural nexus between the DEI world and the like pro-Palestine, like anti-settler colonialism.
There's a lot of weird funding with all that too. A lot of weird organizations that just want chaos, Joker style.
Right, and they also want foreign. I mean, this is another thing. Like you look at something like Soros, which both again like the MAGA base don't like because of him funding all these woke initiatives and these rent-a-riot mobs. But same thing with the in-power Israeli government. Netanyahu and Soros have been at war for a decade. Netanyahu actually
might be the only thing I agree with George on.
But this is the funny thing is like Netanyahu, you can actually pull this up, I think it was in 2018, Netanyahu accused Soros of funding race riots inside of Israel with I think Ethiopian immigrants to Israel, funding race riots against the Netanyahu government, which is the same thing that the MAGA base accuses George Soros of funding with BLM. But what I'm getting at here is how does something like here?
Yeah, I don't believe a word this piece of shit says. like honestly, at this point, if you've seen Netanyahu's pending criminal trial that he keeps on putting off by declaring some fucking new war every week and committing all the acts of everything he's doing, including in Gaza, like they have him dead to rights. All of his friends are on deposition. You can go look at these fucking tapes yourself where he is so very clearly guilty of all these bribery charges, and he's putting it off by creating wars and lying to his people and over and over again and fucking literally gaslighting everyone into buying him as like leader of this country. So much so that we're sitting here talking about George Soros, who I think is a pretty reprehensible individual. And I honestly, like, I'm inclined to be on George's side on this one. That's how crazy things have gotten.
Both things can be true at the same time. I mean, there was USAID.
Maybe.
Like, and this is part of the complication of it and part of the proxy war that's playing out in our own domestic politics. Like, you can have corruption and starting wars in order to postpone like criminal trials, and yet you have this strong alliance with the Trump government. I mean, this is this foreign policy domestic affairs divide where you have like the MAGA base, who I think did not want to get involved with like the strikes on Iran, for example.
Of course not.
And the Netanyahu government started that. I mean, they did the sneak attack while Trump was trying to negotiate with Iran about a second Iran deal,
and then made Trump go in and do the bombing, which you wonder why.
Right, but why? This is one of these things where the structure of the MAGA movement is in a very interesting place because neither faction within MAGA world can win without the support of the others, I don't believe.
That may be true, but there's now a giant dynamite that's been injected into the middle of that with this whole Epstein file thing.
Right, and this is literally in the fact that it's...
Let's bring it... I'm about to pee myself, Mike. I'm sorry. Let me just stop for 1 second, and we'll bring it back so that you can run through all the Epstein file stuff right when we get back.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, we are back. So... we've been going down a lot of great tangents here today. We spent a lot of time kind of connecting Epstein and the rise there. So let's come back to that. And there were some thoughts I had earlier, but I didn't want to stop you. Adnan Khashoggi has been described, and there's research from Henry Abbott that backs this up, that's multi-source, as the guy who taught Jeffrey Epstein a lot of what he knows. Adnan Khashoggi, as you pointed out earlier, was a very mysterious figure with insane ties to Saudi Arabia, was one of the most, if not the most prolific arms dealer of all time. Anyone I've talked to from government, from agencies, has talked about the fact that his flowchart is, I mean, it's everywhere, and he's been dead for a while now. But, you know, Epstein's strange in that in the 1980s is a very mysterious time for him. He has the Towers Financial thing blow up that he just is able to get out the back door, no questions asked. Hoffenberg takes all the blame, runs around going, what the fuck? No one listens to him. And then when you get testimony from people, obviously he's meeting people in the 80s. He's running in these circles. He gets connected to Robert Maxwell, who's one of the most prolific spies of all time, you know, and has all these connections, but he wasn't worth $450 million. Not even close. He lived in a nice place on the Upper East Side, nothing crazy, nothing ostentatious. I don't know what his net worth was offhand, but, you know, think somewhere in the area, 10 million, something like that. He's not this unbelievable, he's a wealthy guy, but not unbelievable wealthy. Are you familiar with the podcasts that Tara Palmieri did on Maxwell and then on Epstein back in 2020?
I don't think I'm familiar with the podcast.
Okay. Well, Tara doesn't get enough credit for this. They were they were investigative podcasts that were basically just not on camera, but she was running around recording everything like a documentary. And for my money, they were the best investigations that we have, like, in that content line on Epstein. And so in the Epstein podcast, she was going around with Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who she got very close to, who now passed on. And they would go to these people who Virginia was connected to through Epstein and try to go talk with them. And most people would like pretend like, oh, I can't talk to you, whatever. So they go to Juan Carlos, I forget his full name, but the guy who was essentially the house manager for Epstein across his properties, but particularly New York for years. And he lived in a gated community now and said, yes, absolutely, I remember you, Virginia, come on in. So Tara and Virginia go in there, and he agrees to go on recording. Anyone can go hear this. And it was one of the wildest things I ever listened to, because you simultaneously felt bad for the guy because you felt like he was put in a bad spot, but also you're like, dude, how could you not have said anything? And he's sitting there with a victim who also really liked him at the same time. It was a strange dynamic. But he filled in a blank that I don't know anyone's ever filled in this well with Epstein. He said, you know, he was working with Jeffrey, I think in the late 80s, and he's like, you know, he had money, but it was nothing crazy. He said that in 1992, something crazy happened.
Yeah.
And this is where his net worth starts to be valued at $450 million. It's where the big mansion on East 71st Street gets signed over to him in his name. Suddenly he got the private jet. Right. He was starting construction, I believe, on the Florida house somewhere, not in 1992, but shortly after the island came into play. But in 1992, he was like, you listen to him describe, he's like, shit was crazy. Right. He went totally like nuts in the money he had. And so you think about it, all right, financier, there has to be something else beyond that and beyond that skill that he's doing to put himself in that position. And we see all the connections to Leslie Wexner, who is directly connected to Israel. He was a guy that was sent on the fucking commission for the 60th with George W. Bush in 2008 to go celebrate this whole thing. And it was never talked to anyone, by the way, since all this shit came out. Yeah. But like Jeffrey Epstein gets rich just months after Robert Maxwell dies on the back of his yacht and mysteriously leaves behind a $450 million pension scam at the Daily Mirror, which, listen, Robert Maxwell was a bad guy, but like he had all these businesses. The idea that he died destitute and had needed to do a $450 million scam, which, by the way, his sons were found not guilty for when they were put on trial a couple years later. It's like, that makes no sense. And then you look at the fact that Jeffrey Epstein just happened to have a net worth right in that ballpark right afterwards. And then you take into account all the cameras he had everywhere he went, and these connections he had that over and over again somehow come back to Israel. It is impossible to not look at this and say, like, how is this not a direct Mossad op that also involves blackmail beyond being a financier? To be fair to Mossad and to Israel, all these places do this. It may not be as blatant as Epstein got, which, by the way, was his fault. He got careless after 2002, and I'm glad he did because we know what a scumbag he is now. But, like, he was always pretty private. Then that article comes out, and then and then he does, exactly. Then he does all these other, interviews with people, and he loved the spotlight. So he did himself in. But, like, so many countries around the world use this type, the espionage organizations use this type of disgusting racket for blackmail. So when you look at what's happening now with Donald Trump, who was connected to the guy, whether you like it or not, he was connected to him for at least 3 decades there. The way that he's reacting, suddenly trying to say this is like an Obama op or something like that. I mean, come on, bro. It's obviously some sort of cover because this same country that makes him go and bomb shit that his whole base doesn't want him to do, is saying, people can't know about this. And it's just so obvious to me that it is impossible to not be pissed off by that. And I'm not saying come out and do a press conference and say, yep, we did all of it, whatever. I'm a realist here. I get it. But, like, the insult to my intelligence and the level to which it's going inside the actual White House itself, it is pretty fucking offensive.
Yeah, I think a lot of the base feels that way about Trump's response to this. This is one of the first things I can think of that Trump has been subjected to the MAGA fury that was so helpful for him in so many other cases. This is one of the strange bedfellows of politics side of it. The Israelis and Saudis were bound into an alliance in the Middle East over the Iran deal in 2015. I don't think Trump could have won president the first time without the support of Israel and Saudi Arabia over the Democrats and NATO opening up Iran and relieving Iranian sanctions. I think the Likud party in Israel felt that there was a security. If Iran gets rich and 100x's their economy, they can deal with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis when Iran was at its somewhat crippled economic state. But if Iran could purchase state-of-the-art military weapons and fund these networks, that would be a security threat to Israel. And Saudi Arabia felt that Iran being able to export its oil and gas would destroy the hegemony that Saudi Arabia has over that. And so you had this Israeli-Saudi alliance, coming back to this kind of Adnan Khashoggi, Iran-Contra, Saudi-Israeli alliance in that case. Mm-hmm. And these were the forces that have been, in a huge part of the reason that we could even have the kind of domestic politics revolution in the United States. I mean, Saudi Arabia also helped finance the purchase of X, for Elon. Yes. You see this very close alliance with MBS. You saw, Kushner, negotiating the Abraham Accords over the Middle East. And there's, what's tough about Trump's response about this is we've been through so much with him, and there's so much love built up. I mean, the BS indictments, if he hadn't won, he would be rotting away on Rikers Island until he dies. I mean, he was facing 1,000 years in prison. He got shot in the face. And, for this to be the thing that it looks like, he's kind of jumping on, when he's normally very transparent about, when the pussy tape dropped,
Mm-hmm.
he owned it. Now I'm unshackled.
He's transparent about everything else.
Right. But the Epstein thing, I think, just gets to, the power of Trump to survive so much of this is that he's got a lot of friends and a lot of backers and has known people for, he was an international celebrity in his 30s and he's now,
yes,
like 80. And a lot of that ran through the networks around Epstein, and not necessarily on I don't focus on the blackmail side of it for a couple of reasons. And I'm not denying that it happened, but I think that the path to transparency on this is by getting answers about the parts of it that are more traditional than I think the American people are aware of. I don't think that most people even know the stories like Mark Rich and Bruce Rappaport and, Adnan Khashoggi type figures who are outside financiers, who are simply cooperative contacts in these operations. And that, you look at all of the statecraft that has to get negotiated in the Middle East, and you're talking about all these countries who, hate each other on one thing, but do business with each other on another. And that all has to be juiced in the background. And then the U.S. government doesn't want to look like it's necessarily favoring one party or striking a deal with one. They want it to happen on its own. And I think with the Epstein story, it's more in the influencer binders. I had a birthday party earlier this month, and someone brought the influencer binder, the phase 1, to my birthday party. But I was thumbing through it, and you can see Trump's on the flight logs. Donald J. Trump, his name is on the flight logs. I think this is in the 1990s, and this was 12 years or so before he was indicted, before Epstein was indicted. I think Trump kicked Epstein out of his Mar-a-Lago club or something. In a pretty high-profile way. But the fact is the Trump financial network and the Trump international diplomacy network is tied to this same Iran-Contra network. I mean, all the way down to from the cabinet picks to the campaign donors, to the personal friends. And I think Trump's defense on this is, I think what he said is context. If we don't want to disclose the names because they'll be taken out of context, because everyone will associate it as being blackmail. Like if you did business with Epstein, you were probably in on the blackmail network or you knew about it, and so you look the other way.
Then don't talk about it and call out Bill Clinton for it for the last fucking decade, and then promise your base that you're going to release it when you know the whole time damn well you weren't. Because, by the way, Bill O'Reilly, who is shot out at this point, he actually outed Trump, I guess by accident here, by saying that he talked to Trump back on St. Patrick's Day, man to man, eye to eye. I looked him in the eyes and said, how can you not release this? He said, Bill, people will be guilty. And yet Trump still continued to say after that date publicly that they were going to release the files. He never planned on doing it.
Right.
And people are in a strange position right now. Now, it's different. Someone in your seat, you're an analyst, very open about where you stand and what you believe. Like in my seat in independent media, my job, whether I like it or not, is in situations like this to be a journalist. This is why when I go and I vote for journalist abstain. That's what I write into every single position. Because I never want to be in a position where you put yourself behind someone because, you're like, well, this is what the moment's saying. You get caught up in it. And then when they do all the opposite of what you actually think they're going to do or something like that, now you got to be like, oh, shit, that's, not what I voted for.
Right.
It's like, we got to cover all these people the same. And right now, there's just no way for me to cut it where it's like you can defend any way that Donald Trump has handled this situation, be it from a transparency perspective, be it from the perspective of having all the people at the FBI that he was trying to clean up, sending in 1,000-person team or whatever it was to flag the name Trump anytime and redact that. Like this is... Every accusation is projection, man, and it works both ways. And I've seen this over and over again from these two parties, this uniparty system where they fight in public and divide every society to distract from all the shit they're going to do around the world that, people won't pay attention to that. And it feels like that's happening again in front of our eyes.
Well, who do you see from the MAGA base defending it? I mean, I've been on X and in media interviews calling for more and more transparency in the specific things. I think Charlie Kirk has been doing that, which is...
he's done the opposite, though, too. Like, well, I believe a direct line from him was, well, I'm going to choose to trust our leaders or something. Like, Charlie, shut the fuck up.
Well, but then he had me on the next day and did a full thing on it. I mean, I think what he wanted to do, and I'm not a mind reader, but I think that when there was a pledge of transparency, which was tenuous, there was probably a kind of calculus to try to reward things moving in the right direction without overly focusing on it because there's so many other things, that are happening at the same time. But I think that, you look at the TPUSA summit and they brought Tucker Carlson in who, demanded transparency. They had, that's a hard thing to imagine TPUSA doing a few years ago. And I think that you've seen that. I've seen Megyn Kelly, come after this. I can't count all that many MAGA high-level voices of the base who have allowed Trump to skate on this. In fact, I think Trump is surprised and actually, has made some gestures. I know that he said that he sort of shot down the special prosecutor probe, but, in theory, authorized the attempt to unseal the grand jury files, which then I think the judge just rejected this week. But I don't think the MAGA base is happy with it, and I think they're letting him know. And I think this is part of what is the crossroads we're at right now, is that like the MAGA movement is filled with a lot of pit bull moms and a lot of like aggressive, guys who don't let issues go. Didn't let go of Hillary's health, didn't let go of, the Rush case, and not letting go of Epstein. I don't think that the MAGA base is going to let it go. And, one of the things that I've been trying to do on this is to go after very specific actionable disclosures, which are easy to do, but easy not to do if you were involved in a cover-up. This is one of the reasons that I've glommed onto things like the Alex Acosta transcript from the Justice. I mean, that is just right down the hallway. You don't need to wait 3 weeks or 48 hours. You can just walk into the office, retrieve the transcript, and publish it for the American people. And every day that's not done suggests that there's something in that transcript that stinks, or there's something in Bill Barr's traffic, or the Office of CIA, Office of General Counsel's traffic in shaping that investigation. And so, there's a fine line where I think there's so much else that's happening that's, this admin has moved a mile a minute in terms of so much on, we just working on the Department of Education, USAID just closed down. We're trying to resolve what's happening on the international side. There's, so I feel what you're feeling there, and I think that's what's made this unique, is that so many people feel that, and it's not getting. Because someone has to write the story of this, and if the Justice Department doesn't, the internet will continue to do that, and will continue to press them. And do you think Trump likes getting asked at a press conference, why haven't you gotten the... He's been snapping at that. And I think that's what's driven him to try to throw a little bone here and there with the unsealing of the grand jury, but then that turned up negative. That was rejected. I think there's going to be more pressure for more disclosures. And every time Trump deflects from that, I think that will probably embolden more of his base to ask more and more questions about it, until there's at least a show of good faith. There's something in the Epstein story that I don't think you're ever going to have anything close to full disclosure. But if you can, look at what happened with the Church Committee. Most people called the Church Committee a whitewash. There were so many things that were blocked. The entire MKUltra file was shredded. But there was enough accountability that even though it's conjecture beyond the official file, we at least had a general sense of how bad things had gotten, and then knowledge, because we knew what was deleted. Like Alex Acosta, 11 months of his official DOJ.gov emails were deleted when OPR went to investigate it. So, questions like, you can't subpoena the Israeli government. You can't subpoena Saudi intelligence. You can't subpoena, British intelligence, or, the right. French side of this. But you have our own intelligence agencies, and you can start there. And you can say, what did they know? John Ratcliffe is the head of the CIA. He was asked, when Pam Bondi was asked at the press conference whether or not Epstein was an intelligence asset, and Trump cut her off and said, you don't need to answer that. It's a very fishy thing to stop from being answered. And then Pam Bondi said, I don't know. We're looking into it. We'll get back to you. John Ratcliffe was sitting right next to her at that cabinet meeting. Didn't say a word. I find it unbelievable that there would not have been a name trace done on Jeffrey Epstein in 2006, the first time that he was indicted, in 2019.
What do you mean a name trace?
Every time CIA, every mention of his name in traffic, every time the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, touches something, and there's the special economic activities, every financing for every activity that touched Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UK, France, where Epstein was in network, everything that touched Wexner, everything that touched Ehud Barak, everything that touched the Bronfman family, dating back 40 years, I do not believe that there is no traffic inside our foreign intelligence that mentioned Epstein's name, mentioned his passport number, mentioned anything that he touched. And I don't believe that the CIA would unilaterally pull that information without being forced to by the Attorney General, who can compel that. It takes about 2 weeks to turn around a CIA name trace for a single individual. And you will have every single time that Epstein was ever mentioned for the past 44 years, where he was running through these Iran-Contra networks, he was running through these Iraq-Gate networks, he was running through Bill Clinton networks.
The files aren't destroyed.
But we don't even know that they've asked. And these are easy things not to do if someone's not up their butt demanding it, but they're easy things to do. It's just one request. The OPR, it's right down the hallway from Pam Bondi's office. So I understand the size of the universe around the Epstein thing, but what I try to focus my ass on the narrow things that are easy to do and that look horrible if you don't do them because of how easy they are. So this is why I've focused on sort of the narrower side of Epstein, and then what opens up from there, the internet can take from there.
All right. To be continued, because you got a call to take. But yeah, there's still a lot on the bone there. I agree with you. I don't think we're ever going to know anywhere near the full truth, but like even something just to know what direction some of it was would be helpful. So I am rooting for that to happen. I'm very cynical about any of that happening. But Mike Benz, everyone can follow you on X, on YouTube as well. Links down below. We did previous episode as well together. I think that was episode 309. So people could check that out. We'll have that link down below. But fire hose as always, man. Really enjoyed it today.
Likewise. Thanks.
All right. Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for watching the episode. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. They're both a huge, huge help. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below.